And we're now officially live. Welcome again to another episode of Dice Scum's Lore Ramblings. I'm Adam.
Greg.
Tech Priest is
And
here,
I'm
but
Tech
he's
Priest,
too busy
yes.
boggling. He's too busy boggling at the Moscovich car label being brought back from its grave.
Yeah, So, Lada has been recently releasing cars without airbags or anti-brake systems in Russia, which I want to say is a real throwback to the good old days of Russian car manufacturing.
Well, think of it like this. Think of it like this. It's a form of state-sponsored eugenics.
It is. It's literally if you cannot see in the future on an icy road in Russia, you're gonna die.
Speaking of paranoid self-delusions and insanity, not Hunter the Vigil, although there's a lot of elements of that in the traditional game. No, the witch hunting days.
Colonial England in general.
Yeah.
Sorry, colonial America in general. Jesus Christ, I haven't even had a drink yet, and I'm already messing this up. So, one of the fun things about the Kickstarter for this was that this was one of the ones that everybody was really hyped for, and I have to say it does live up to it.
Oh, you read it ahead of time?
Well,
He
yes,
mentioned
I've
it
read
last
this book
session.
before quite a bit.
Yeah, he mentioned that last time.
Fair
But
enough.
yeah, this one does go through it. It is the summary of an era, a very specific era in American history, that there's kind of this short period in the colonies where everything hits this fever pitch of insanity in a very specific area. Now, it had already been kind of insane beforehand, but at this point, it went from the standard insanity of the colonies to advanced insanity.
So, for those wondering, the backstory of this setting, this time period, is this is about 40 years after the first of, there's technically three great revival periods in religion in colonial England and the Americas as a result. You can actually blame all three of them for why the United States and most of the Americas tends to be more religious than the old world. Mainly because it's a consequence of kicking out all your religious radicals over there to avoid them causing trouble in your homeland. At least in the English case.
Let me put it like this: no one liked the Puritans, not even the Dutch, and the Dutch liked everyone.
Puritans didn't like the Puritans. Puritans
Yeah.
didn't like the Puritans.
The Puritans were such assholes that the
Rhode
Dutch,
Island. Oh no, to get better. They hate each other so much, Rhode Island only formed because the Puritans hated the Puritans of Rhode Island that damn much.
Yeah. It says something when you can get kicked out of a country by some of the most tolerant people religiously in Europe at the time. Say, no, you guys need to fucking leave. We're fucking sick of you.
Well, the thing is, around the 1650s, there's the Great First Revival period.
The Great Awakening.
The First Awakening, the Great Awakening. And this is where a variety of religious thoughts came about. In particular, one of them was the Puritan movement, but another was a more common one you might have heard of as Methodism.
Yep.
Methodism was essentially what happened was it was an attempt to purify the Church of England.
Try to clear it out of the clear out the Catholic cobwebs, basically.
Because there was this high church element to it at this point.
Yeah.
High church referring to those who were basically crypto-Catholics.
The classical Anglicans, which was always sort of Catholicism with the serial numbers filed off.
And while Methodism never went quite as insane, in fact, actually, fun fact, they were one of the first Christian groups to really heavily evangelize towards African Americans. Hence why they have such large church congregations. The other ones, the Puritans, were the equivalent of the black tar heroin abusers of the religious scene that day.
This is the Westboro Baptist Church of its era.
Mm-hmm. And they had a colony.
They had several colonies.
They had quite a bit. New England in general is their fault.
Yeah. You can for all the weird shit and hang-ups in the United States about everything from sex to how you dress to all this, A lot of it can be traced back to these motherfuckers.
No. That's too much credit to them. You forgot the second and third Great Awakenings formed in the 1750s, and then the millenarian death cult movement of the 1850s.
Oh God, I forgot about the
Those two are
1850s one.
just as fucking
Oh
culpable.
God.
Yeah, if you're
'Cause I-
wondering,
when I think
viewers,
of the
every
18
100 years, the United States tends to shit out a massive religious revival movement. I'm not apologizing for that.
And
Methodists spawned off of Anglicans. They actually, them and Episcopalians came from the Anglican Church. And Methodists, in a lot of ways, still see themselves related to, but not quite. They see themselves as a more purified, a reformed version of Anglicanism.
yeah, like
The whole point was to remove some of the corrupt elements of the High Church.
the point of it was to try to take the elements of the high church out and lower the bar, basically. I guess you could almost say. In terms of like the bar for priesthood, things like that, to some degree as well, and
that's also one of the
to
reasons they're so popular. They formed so many African American churches because they were one of the first Christian organizations to ordain black preachers.
free blacks at all. Like they were one
Not
of the
only
few communities
teach,
that
but
would
allowed
accept them.
them
Yeah.
allowed them to take the servant duties as a church member and
Yes.
priest.
Yes, actually allow them in the church, basically.
As members and leaders.
Yes. They were also non-surprisingly one of the biggest advocates against slavery in the United States. They considered it an immoral practice from basically the start, which actually differed from several other branches of the faith.
Of the Anglican offshoots. There's several.
Yeah. There's the Baptist movement sort of isn't.
The Baptist
like
actually, they're not related at all. They're actually based on a German covenant from the 1560s.
Oh, right. Yeah. Yeah,
because
they're
they
more
come
Calvinist.
from Anabaptist roots.
Yeah, you're right.
They're not actually
mixing them up with
Calvinist
someone
either.
else.
They're not Reformed at all. They have more in common with the Amish than they do with other
The Amish and the
Protestant
Mennonites.
churches.
Yeah, that would actually that would make sense. That the Amish and the Mennonites.
They come
I mean,
from
the
the
Baptist,
same base concept, Anabaptist, the baptism of an adult.
If I
Anyway,
remember correctly, the Baptist
speaking
Church
of,
entirely split because of slavery in the 1850s.
speaking of hot button subjects and religious
Oh yeah, the time that a bunch of Puritans got their shit wrecked by DMT.
Yeah, that's
that's literally how the witch trials happened.
There's more than just that, but before we start on this, there are some fantastic books on this era. A History of American Witchcraft is, I think, one of the better books. I think that's the title of it. I quite enjoy it. It's essentially a study of like the sort of the weird way that a lot of the European traditions just sort of followed right over, and we're going to get into that a little bit here as well. But there's a bit of the fake history of the world according to Hunter, and we should probably get into that first to go through that before we get to the full fun talk time about the closet homosexual king that wrote a Bible and his obsession with witches. Oh boy.
Well, I mean, that's part of it. The other part is a bunch of arrogant assholes that got kicked out of Holland got really high on DMT.
There's that as well, but they were witch crazy even before that. Yeah. Like it's a topic in and of itself.
Oh,
honestly.
Also don't forget that the population density got so high that they were getting angry that their neighbors had more land than them.
Yeah. and that's what this is also a bit about. As it says, future generations will tell the story of the English colonies as if they were alone in the dark. But they were not alone. They have allies and enemies amongst the natives, triple ties to their former homes across the sea. Most of all, though, they are kept company by their fear. Fear of walking into the forest at night. Fear of being driven back by those whose land they usurped. And more than anything, fear amongst each other. On their own farms and in their town squares and even in their homes dwells the devil.
Yeah. And the big themes
I'm wondering if I should do it. I'm wondering if I should speak this whole time in like the tone of the which fund general.
I think that'd get grating if it lasted too long.
Yeah, but I couldn't do it. I will say the Friedrich Nietzsche quote in it though. Although the most acute judges of witches and even witches themselves were convinced of the guilt of their witchery, the guilt nevertheless was non-existent. It is thus with all guilt.
The big
Which in
theme
Hunter the
is
Ritual's case is flat out wrong.
yeah. Anyway, the theme is challenged beliefs. See, in the Chronicles of Darkness, there are things that go bump in the night. There is actual witchery afoot. There are beasts that crawl in and drink the lifeblood that almost seem like they're of the devil. This, in this setting, is not a thing that's questioned. It's a thing that is. But the difference is, rather than actually pin the right things to blame, they blame each other. Which actually is spot on for what, if I was going to write a witch hunt era hunter, this is exactly what their problem would be. They know what the real threat is, at least they think they know. The problem is it's the other people around them that make it just as difficult to do their job, and hell, even put them under threat.
One of the phrases described as, Satan eating, not Satan, Kronos eating his own children, is kind of the nature of this era in a lot of ways with witch trials. Those who accuse others of being witches often end up being accused as witches themselves. Those that basically are on the outskirts of society are among the first to become victimized in almost every circumstance here. And we'll actually cover some of the few unfortunates that were caught up in the hysteria for reasons often out of their own control. But as we get into the shadow history here, this part is where it's the weakest of the section, but it works okay. It's literally just here's Hunter.
Let's at least go over the theme and mood.
Well, theme, as we mentioned before, is challenged beliefs.
The mood is
unknown. Everything is unknown. You have to understand that in early colonial America, there's a lot of uncertainty about what's actually out there.
There be dragons out there.
We don't know if there's monsters of some kind, and a lot of like the classic monsters of American folklore kind of come from this era, like the Jersey Devil.
And on top of that, this part of the world, it's only been settled for less than 100 years. Oh, sure, there's larger towns.
Yes.
There's larger towns, and there's a couple that almost seem like cities, like Philadelphia and Boston, and the Dutch New York, or New Amsterdam, as it was recently known by. But besides these, it's just you're a small village out in the boonies. Sometimes you're on the ass end of the borderlines between what's claimed by the crown and what's out there.
Not only that, but there are active, violent clashes going on between the natives and everyone else at this period.
Maybe not in your area, but you hear reports from further south and north of tribes that just one night go into the village, and at the end of it, in the morning,
they're just fucking sick of you, and they just say, "Yeah, no, it's time to go."
There's stories of natives going into schools and murdering all of the children there with hatchets. Fun fact, that held the record for the largest amount, for the biggest case of school children violence until the 1920s.
When somebody blew up a boiler, if I remember correctly.
Fertilizer bomb, actually.
Really? I thought it was he overloaded the boiler.
It was one or the other, yeah. He used explosives.
Regardless, part of the problem is you don't know. You hear things, you suspect things. That's part of the fear of the unknown. You might be a hunter, but how do you act? And you might think that the witches are the great threat. You might even know it in your head. But what can a witch do?
And also, what else is out there?
Is what you're hunting the real threat? Is what you're hunting what the threat is trying to get you to think? You don't know, and that's the problem. You are a bumfuck, ignorant peasant.
Poking at
things.
You probably know a lot about witches. You know that they can transform into about fucking anything.
Yeah. And well, that's what you think you know, but that's the thing. What you think you know.
And on top of that, there's rumors of all these other horrible creatures, like some lady made a pact with a monster in the woods of New Jersey, and now it's haunting and murdering farmsteads.
Yeah, like there's a lot of this crazy shit, but yes.
There's apparently a dragon living out in the Chesapeake Bay. What the hell's that?
What the fuck's happening? Anyway, the a charred past bit is just talking that witchcraft has been associated with black magic or Satan worshipping for a long time. Sort of
Although
yes, sort of no. There's
the Catholic Church, and I have to point this out, this is one of the interesting things. The Catholic Church took a very dim view on people accusing people of black magic.
Because
for
only
one
God
thing,
can give miracles.
exactly.
The
They
only source
basically
of magic comes from the Lord himself.
Anything the devil can give you is an illusion.
So what would happen traditionally, at least in Europe in the earlier days, is a person who accused someone of witchcraft very likely was executed as a heretic.
For believing in witchcraft.
Yeah. Though this changed due to people like Martin Luther, who put 95 reasons why the Catholic Church fucking sucks. Which at the time was fair. The Catholic Church was hideously corrupt. No,
yes,
seriously, look at some of the popes during that time.
But I think the term is,
The
but in
Feast of
this case,
Chestnuts come to mind.
But in some cases, some communities chose to throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Oh, yeah. And it was actually commonly used by headsmen and chiefs and counts in the Old Holy Roman Empire. That's why witch hunting was so popular over there. So 17th century hunters, witches, mystics, seers, vampires, and mages are part and parcel of the Chronicles of Darkness, and that's true. You can run into any one of these. So when viewing the supernatural through a modern lens, hunters of today might have a hard time convincing people that magic's real. Not the case in this time period. Especially not in the Americas.
No, and we'll get into this once we get through this, but because I do want to talk about the actual historical shit here, but oh boy, there is some very interesting stuff going on.
They also reference the Cainite heresy.
Yes, they do.
Which is kind of neat. If you're wondering, it's a slight nod to the old world of darkness, but it's a covenant. It's a covenant of hunters who effectively just said fuck vampires.
Not only fuck vampires, but like
Vampire world government. They were the first believers in vampire world government.
Yeah.
The vampires are behind everything wrong, and we need to, because God told us to with one of his angels, go and kill them all.
Also, we need blood. Please give us your vitae, because a lot of them were former ghouls. So, some more details. They go into background on where the witch hunting in general comes from. The Catholics did repeatedly set up inquisitions, which were religious courts and judge, jury, and executioners looking for those who've strayed far from the light of God, at least according to the
Or
Pope
if you're in southern France, God knows
peasant.
his own.
Yeah, God knows his own. It's not just that, but there was also the Spanish Inquisition, which was introduced around the time of the Reformation. And there's also the lesser known, but also just as nasty French Inquisition. And there actually was a Belgian Inquisition as well.
Yeah, the Spanish is the most famous for obvious reasons.
But the Belgians actually were the nastiest of the three.
Mind you, the Belgian Inquisition was just the Spanish Inquisition, except they spoke French occasionally.
Because they were looking into those who were also in the Netherlands as well. So they also might have spoken Dutch. That's why they were nastier. They had more targets to hit with.
Yeah.
And the French one was kind of both, because the French kings always had this weird, I'll ignore you and then I'll massacre you, your family, and your friends. And it happened every other generation traditionally.
Yep. So, right, as time goes on, though, you have all the fun stuff about the Inquisition here. They kind of talk about how there's different waves of it, how the Malleus is forming, how the Luciferge is forming as well, the two of the main conspiracies within Hunter.
They also go into the variety of torture devices.
Oh boy!
How the medieval Europe, maybe not perfected, but mastered the craft of torture and painful execution.
Because that's some of the only ways you can get confessions, right?
Yeah, you can only really believe someone's telling the truth after you've ripped out all of their fingernails and gouged out an eye.
Oh, especially after you force them to stay awake 5 days in a row after feeding them nothing but Nutriloaf.
Keeping them naked in a metal cage to be pecked at by birds.
Yeah, they'll definitely tell you that they serve the devil, even if he was a priest. Especially if
Even
he's
if
a
they're
priest.
10. Even if they were 10.
Even if it was a 5-year-old child. Yeah, the
And no,
Inquisition was
and they won't
nasty.
just tell you, they did it. They'll tell you all their friends who did it.
Yeah. And it's not a rehearsed list that they just automatically know by rote after you beat it into them.
And it's not just something they're saying to stop the pain.
So yeah, if you're wondering, Hunter conspiracies there were a variety around this time before then. Yeah, they're not getting into this. They're not getting into it because if they try to help, well, church might have them get hit with the rack and all the other things.
Well, mind you,
Yeah.
that's specifically the Catholic conspiracies.
Yeah, namely the Luciferge and the Malleus, which are kind of in a weird spot. So basically,
Lucifer's is fucking weird. Lucifer's is fucking
yeah, the
weird.
Luciferge is weird. There's always 666 of them, and they're part demon, but not demon as you know it, because
Don't think about it.
don't think about it. Chiron is around at this time too as the Acheron Shipping and Trading Guild.
Yeah, didn't know that.
Which is fun. Of course, you got Aegis Kai, Doru, the Canaanites, and the Ascending Ones are all around as well. But in general, the Silent Imperative came up with the idea of essentially that the point though is that what we're doing right now is we need to maybe not like become the targets. We need to really double down on not becoming the targets of everyone else.
It's almost like believing yourself to be the children of Satan is a bad idea when there's witch hunters and
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
specifically,
out there.
yeah, specifically, as I mentioned, the Catholic Church did do their own little hunting thing, except they didn't just target, the monsters. They targeted the hunters as what an equal measure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because quite a few of them did things that were considered
Heretical.
massively
Or,
heretical.
yeah, it
Or in the
doesn't
form of
matter if
one
they were able to.
conspiracy, you're literally claiming you're the spawn of Satan. What the fuck? Die.
Yeah.
Also, wait, what? Wait, you're using pagan rites to capture ghosts? Fucking heretic! Actually, no, heathen. You're worse than a heretic. You're a heathen.
Repent,
And
repent as you ride the Spanish horse.
it's also important to note that really the nature of how we viewed evil really got shifted around by one motherfucker in the Middle Ages, which is Thomas Aquinas.
Do they mention
Which-
him in here?
Yeah, they do. Part of the doctrine of the church,
Oh wow,
to some
you
degree.
skipped quite a bit because I just noticed the Acheron
Satan's-
shipping.
Yeah, that's what I thought we were on that page. My bad.
No, that's
let
fair.
me look at the stream again.
Oh, I was just at Satan's children stand accused.
That's where
That's
we
what
are
I
here.
thought we were.
Because that's where it is. That was just going. That's what I just went through. Was the
Yeah, I was just also like
Luciferge.
looking at her demons, inner witch, tragically accused.
Yeah. Then we get into Outer Demon Inner Witch, which is the talk about how the nature of the devil in this era. Then Tragically Accused is the next bit where we're talking about the Black Death, and then
Because
all
the
that.
witches were sometimes accused of bringing plague.
Yeah. The Black Death also made it very difficult to some degree for vampires because suddenly there was less food.
Well, on top of that, do vampires still have that occasional flaw where they keep the disease when they bite?
Yes, they do. Also, there's certain vampires that thrive during this era because there's an entire bloodline that literally can only drink from the ill.
But, also, but I think they kind of also meant that you can't talk about disease and witchcraft without mentioning the 7 Years' War.
That's
just
further
witchcraft
ahead,
trials.
though, isn't it?
I know, but just as a reference, witchcraft trials don't stop in the Old War for quite a while after.
No, the witchcraft trials don't really start though for a long time. when
You
they're
know what my
talking about
favorite
the
witchcraft
Inquisition.
trial is, though?
What?
Remember the Prophet Hen of Leeds?
Oh God,
The lady
yes.
who set it
Oh
up, Mary
no.
Bateman, was put on trial as a witch, and she was hanged
I know.
until dead.
I
This is
know.
the 1800s, by the way.
Was that the 1800s, or I thought that was the
Yes.
18th century?
No, 1800s?
Prophet
1808,
Hen of
if I
Limbs.
remember right. It gets better because then after her death, strips of her own flesh were removed to be made into talismans.
1809. Yeah, that.
I'm gonna be honest. Which I also remember the. I'm not gonna get into it in case you enter it, but one of my favorite methods of detecting what a witch was seeing if they weighed the same as a duck. If they weighed the same as a duck, then they must be a witch.
Because
But if they don't,
witches can float in water.
yeah. But if they don't float, but if they don't weigh the same as a duck, don't weigh the same as a duck. Well, they're still a witch because they're trying to trick you.
I
I'm
think my
not
favorite
joking.
one is the mole test.
Yeah, we'll get into that. They're going to go into that.
Yeah, I know.
But yeah, so the fun bit is when we're talking about Chiron is all of this sort of stuff happens. They get around. There's the fact is that they are in the colonies. They're going to be around, and so is the Malleus.
Well, the Malleus isn't surprising.
But not to the same degree, because you've got to remember the Malleus is a very Catholic conspiracy.
And we're in a very Protestant area.
Yeah, officially, the Malleus, as we know it as a conspiracy, was founded in 1567, almost 80 years after the first publication. But the main thing to note is the Malleus Maleficarum itself was kind of a heretical text.
Oh yeah, it even goes into that priest versus priest.
Yes, they meant. I want to mention this very specifically. Part of the Catholic churches and a lot of legal notions was that witchcraft doesn't exist in the form you think it does, but the devil can, which kind of gets into some weird knock-on effects. Now, you also have to note that around the turn around the 1500s, once we get into the printing press, there's a lot more people that are able to talk to each other across Europe about various things and then publish what they think about various topics.
Also,
One of these
whoever
things,
published Malleus Maleficarum is responsible for almost all witches being women.
that's part of it. The man,
Oh
it
yeah,
was an incel. It was
like,
published by an incel. I'm not joking.
Well, why do you think
jokes
so
aside,
many people take up the robe?
Jokes aside, the translation of first off, the name in the original Latin and the translation both still sound fucking badass. Malice, the hammer of witches.
The Hammer of Witches, yes.
It's a pretty badass name.
The fun bit about it, I also love Cotton Mather's book title because it's the most puritanly ridiculous thing, and it is worth reading. If you can understand Old English, it's worth reading because it's just like a little nuts. Memorable provinces relating to witchcrafts and possessions, which is just like there's a title. The main thing though is, as I mentioned, is that the Malleus kind of gets in the Maleficarum and the Luciferge kind of work together, even in this era. There's an acceptance that they may be the children of the devil, but they're not necessarily evil, which is
Because
very
the
Catholic
founder
when you think about it.
found one of the Luciferge and decided to work with her.
Yes.
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, you have to remember that one of the especially Catholic rites is no. We all have the original sin, but we can be redeemed.
Yes, this is actually one of the interesting things about Catholic theology, which is the debate about whether the devil can actually be redeemed ever, possibly.
And Baudolino actually believed this is the case. It also helped they bonded by dissecting a vampire while it was still alive.
Yes, and he drank its blood. He's still around. That's one of the dirty secrets of the Malleus is that the head of their order is a ghoul, specifically a ghoul that preys on vampires.
And considering how old he is a crack addict.
He is a crack addict. He's a high functioning crack addict, I guess would be the way to put it.
Why were titles so obtuse back then? because you needed an impressive name usually to get nobility who, remember, not all of them knew how to read, to give a shit.
Most didn't know how to read.
Majority didn't, yeah.
And so also a long book title generally also provided information on what it was about to people so they could
Because
buy it.
books were an investment. You needed to know, is this piece of shit worth it?
So, which is why you get some very, 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 very long titles of like, especially in the Renaissance, because everyone knows about Plato's Republic, and those are very short and simple names. But you need to distinguish yourself from the classics.
And on top of that, well, hey, guess what? The printing press allowed you to make more books quicker, which means that you don't have to worry about as much. Like, you
Yeah,
could
like
expand your library, so you don't have to waste your time. And
but
the
that
books
also
are
means that
cheaper.
you need to be able to remember what you got at a thing, you know.
Also, since books are cheaper, you could gamble a bit more.
Yeah, so having a long title that tells you what's in the book is actually really helpful in that case, because it's like, oh, I might be interested
Because
in
there's
this.
more options now, yeah.
Yeah. Or this is actually about what I need.
But yeah, during the 16th and 17th century, there was a massive surge in witch accusations, which is one of
Yes.
the side effects of having a massive religious series of wars and Reformation period.
It's more an aspect of the Reformation, which allowed the challenging, because remember, there's always that sort of nature of like everything's
You
kind of
can't kill superstition. You can't kill
yeah.
superstition.
There's always the witch, but there's always the question of, well, she can't be given divine power because God doesn't bless people like that unless they're saints. And I know this woman; she's definitely not a saint. That must be the devil. Kind of becomes that's kind of the logic that ends up taking over to some degree. There's also kind of the issue of folk magic is still very popular, and no matter how much the church talks about it not being real, everyone believes in it.
Oh, and in this case, some of it is real. Keep that in mind.
Yes.
In this setting,
Keep
some
that
of
in
it is real.
mind.
Avoiding suspicion.
And hunters even admit that, yeah, during this dark period of time, they didn't actually get a lot of monsters.
They maybe got 30% if we're
The
being generous.
optimists say 30. The cynic
Yeah.
might say 10. Out of
Now,
100 tried and burned, only 10 might have actually been real monsters. And we're not talking like vampires or werewolves. We're talking something as simple as a ghoul.
yeah,
Or maybe, I don't know if do mages still have
wolf-blooded.
wolf-blooded? Okay, I was wondering if that was in
Wolf-blooded,
there.
and which is the werewolf,
And
which
sleepwalkers
is
for mage?
sleepwalkers are for mage. Yes, the ones that aren't really affected
Also,
by.
Just like a
well,
hedge wizard.
in some cases, and in some cases, it's confusing. Like, how do you, like, yeah, the hunter might have burned that guy, but he was a geist.
And they just kind of came back,
Well,
and
then
it's
they
like,
come
oh,
back, and then they go, "Oh wait, that's not the devil. That's a saint."
that might be a saint. Fuck.
I would that actually would be a funny idea where they just one of the hunter compacts they invent is just based around this geist who came back from the dead.
As a compact, that would actually be an interesting compact to have as like a side note for the Maleficarum. Would be like there's a compact they occasionally relate to, which is like a minor order of monks that are the followers of.
Because of a man who was burned for witchcraft, but came back and actually proved that he was guided by God. Because the sin
An
eater
angel,
that attached to
specifically.
him was actually a priest in a prior life.
An angel. No, an angel specifically. Yes,
Which is,
he literally
yeah,
had a guardian angel. He
yeah.
had a guardian angel.
And they still, and that's where they get some of their idea. They get some of the minor abilities of a sin eater.
Mm-hmm.
That actually would be fun.
Yeah. To some degree here, when we're also talking about the nature of the world overall in this era, is that you've got to remember that everything is really fucking weird.
Weird, changing, and a lot of dead people.
I like this one. To some, it was easier to hunt in a world where morality was black and white, even though the truth is that living in the Chronicles of Darkness isn't that clear cut.
Yeah. Like, there are vampires that you do need to take out because they're horrible. But sometimes they just hang out and don't really cause trouble, except maybe an occasional death of sheep.
And what happens when that vampire might be the only thing keeping the local lord from massacring the Jews for the 5th fucking time this year?
Yeah.
Yeah.
from Imset, even better, the Geist rises 3 days later.
Oh god, then he definitely becomes a martyr for the church.
If Old World of Darkness would totally do that.
Old World of Darkness would totally make Joan of Arc a Geist. Or some shit like that.
It'd be so fucking brain dead. God,
Yeah,
105th
also,
edition is terrible.
They're gonna do it.
but yeah, as it says here in the avoiding suspicion, funnily enough, the witches and like the actual magicians aren't really that stressed by the Inquisition as much. They're more busy fighting the vampires at the moment.
Yeah, like there's
Is that a slight nod to the Great Masasa War?
somewhat, but also sort of a nod to the fact that like the witches don't like
Wait,
mages
is this a nod
really
to Ars? Is this a nod to Ars Magica? Because that does
no.
happen in it.
No, in this case, this is more, I'd say, a nod to the fact that an actual mage of any skill can pretty much just avoid all these problems.
Avoid the problems of a mage of competence could probably blast away an entire team of inquisitors that isn't blessed by actual like holy power.
To break the covenant, you could totally have a mage show up, right, and pull
Yeah.
the same gambit as the learned knight from the Monty Python movie, where using bad logic and a slight bit of mind effect, mind sphering, gets the crowd to believe that this person who's, I don't know, maybe out for their money is a witch because they weigh as much as a duck. Using this clearly rigged scale.
Yes, that
with magic.
is very possible.
It's very trivial to avoid. In fact, actually, to a book for babies, Harry Potter kind of played with that too. If you have magic that powerful, just make it so that you just pretend to get burned alive if they catch you somehow.
That was one of the most clever things about that series. I think there was like a
like you could just cast a simple spell and just pretend to burn.
Yeah, there was a woman
who
I think
loved the sensation of being burned while with the spell on.
So she got burned 62 times?
Yeah. That's clever, and that's the thing with mage in this setting.
But yeah, I mean, eventually you might get lucky.
Well, again, while they mostly just burned innocent people, they did still get some monsters. Like, they can confirm blatantly without a doubt. Some of them were really monsters.
Yes.
And sometimes a mage will be, even a good one, will be a fucking dumbass and let themselves get shot in the back of the head.
To quote Big D, they are nerds. You can easily punch them.
Yeah, the problem is, if you don't punch them without planning about it, they'll just obliterate you.
They'll literally turn your brain into corned cob.
They will reverse time so that you are now in front of the bullet.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, moving on to the actual specific setting, though, this good old Salem, or as it used to be called, Namukeg.
Yeah, they're not going to call
before we get into that,
this is the Puritans.
Before we get into that, we need to talk a little bit about the lead up to all of this in England, because this is what I've been waiting for, the whole dump on probably one of the craziest ass stories in all of like early modern Europe. James the First and Sixth of Scotland, this motherfucker. So the witchcraft hysteria that was going through Europe at this time was not fully in swing on the British Isles at the time either. It was mostly confined to Germany at this point, and while witches were of course being tried in England,
it was
England at this point
a relic of Elizabethan police state policy. Yeah,
it was more like, we just don't like this person, we're just going to throw him.
They're clearly a witch, and which is just tag sign for crypto Catholic or trouble
basically.
causer.
That's been the case almost through a lot of the English witch trials, or the early period. That's the case. It's essentially, and witch trials in general. Now, this meant that it was men were also often included in this list.
And the
people who owed money.
In Russia and Scandinavia too, by the way.
Yes, Russia and Scandinavia, men were more likely to be accused of being witches, primarily because it's kind of just one of those things where it is considered
men were more important. Men were more important.
Partly, and also that like the concept of a woman using magic wasn't bad as much to some degree. It's kind of complicated.
It's just
There's
Russian
some
things,
cultural
yeah.
there's some cultural hangups with that. So anyway, as this is going through, we reach James of Scotland. Now, England at this point is pretty Protestant. James is in Scotland. James finally becomes the King of England because Elizabeth dies, and his mother, I think, was her I want to say cousin.
It's because the Tudors married into the Stuarts.
Yes,
A couple
I'm.
of in the time of Henry VII, if I'm correct.
Yeah, so I think Elizabeth was his cousin. I think.
He had the
So
best claim that was Protestant. There were
yeah,
still a couple
there
other
was
picks.
technically, I think, one from Spain that was closer,
But
but
god
yeah,
damn it, they
Protestant.
weren't letting a Spaniard on the
Oh
throne.
God,
They
no, they
just
weren't going to let
fought
a
a
Spaniard
fucking
in.
war over kicking him out.
So James the First is well now he's James the First is an interesting character in and of himself. You could probably do an entire podcast series about just James the First. He's a bit of a weird dude. James is a homosexual. We're pretty sure he's either homosexual or bisexual due to letters that were written about him,
He
things that
liked
were going on around him.
he liked one
And
at least enough.
there were two
He
men that
tended to
he probably had a relationship with in a sexual nature.
he
I
tended
mean,
to prefer to hang out with them than his wife. Yes.
yes, to the point where there were open jokes about this in court, and they weren't really tamped down on. So there's a point where it's kind of like, also he referred to one of them in his letters as his wife. So draw the conclusion. Oh yeah, also the secret chamber in his castle between their room and his. So
Oh yeah, the pig dungeon.
yeah, so someone tried to say it was to the pig's dungeon or something like that to try to deny that no, James the First was a flaming homosexual. So now, despite the fact that he prefers dick, he needs to produce an heir, which means that he needs to get married. Now, to get married, he needs to find an eligible Protestant woman in Europe with a good family and claim possibly to another throne. There is a very, very good candidate to this who is, if I remember correctly, her name is Anne, and she's in Denmark. So off James goes to write some letters, gets the approval of the King of Denmark, and sails on over to get his queen. He gets stuck in Denmark for about 6 months. And he can't get married yet because he has to get married on English soil. He's basically insisted on it because
rules, yeah.
it's more he's insistent about it because he needs it to look as legitimate as possible, and also because the man I have no clue if he was autistic, but the man was very, very much the kind of person I could see getting into a tizzy about this little detail. This is a man who got into a bunch of religious arguments over the most minor points of doctrine. He's a bit frantic.
He's a pedant,
now,
yeah.
So he finds the thing that's keeping him from returning and becoming
we're a bunch of Danish sailor boys.
We're a bunch of Danish sailor boys, which were very hunky, and he spent a lot of time around asking about the weather in between getting his dick sucked. So they blame the fact that the weather isn't changing on witches.
Because
and on the way
Denmark
back,
what else could it be?
To Germany, and they,
yes,
while not having as strong because of the moderation of Sweden and Norway, even if they hated each other a fucking lot during this time, they still tended to be a little more chill with witch hunting. Just nowhere near as chill as England at the time.
Yeah, England, it was literally, there's the old biddy down the road that no one's seen for 5 years. She might be a witch. No one really bothers
in Denmark,
her.
it's more, this person has been whispering strange things. Let's try them for witchcraft. While in Germany, it's that person looked at me wrong. I'm killing them.
Yeah. So we're getting into the fun stage here, where now also on the way back, he nearly dies in a storm again. Of course, James, being a logical, rational person,
and ignoring that the North Sea is notorious for awful weather,
blames witches and starts writing an entire book about witchcraft. I'm not kidding you here. There is a book written by King James the First of England, entirely on the topic of witchcraft, and it's written in the style of the time, which means it's kind of a weird mix between a dialogue and not a dialogue. It's really weird. It's fun. So he writes this entire book, which comes to the conclusion that A, witches are real, and B, they're a tool of Satan, and C, they're out to get me because I'm God's representative on Earth.
And D, he made my pee-pee not work in the middle of all my Danish sailor boys. I'm very angry about that.
So he, of course, publishes this, and of course, every good and honest, true-blooded patriot of the combined kingdoms of England and Scotland now is going to pick up a copy. Like, if you're a minor nobleman, you're going to pick up a copy because the king wrote this.
By the
It
way,
has to be
there's
interesting.
another factor I want to introduce, which is a nod to the Tudor, to the Wilting Rose period.
Yeah.
England has had a long history of professional witnesses
Yes.
who have a tendency to say, as I was drinking in the bar upon this night, I discovered the victim of the future execution plotting treason against the king, and they'd be paid like a shilling per representation, at least by the party that wants them convicted. It's very corrupt. England had a very corrupt witness system.
So
wow.
So on top of all that,
combine James's new book with the British tendency for spectacle, scandal, and reporting crimes and making money off of it. Witch
and it goes further
explodes.
because this is before the religious fervor really sweeps England.
This is right.
That
this
happens
is before the Civil War. Yeah.
Yes, because remember, James then translates the Bible, and he pays particular attention to the parts about witchcraft because he's very interested in that. And there's some rumors that he may have written those bits himself with translation, and he wasn't a very good translator.
Oh yeah, the original King James Bible, which Baptists swear by, not the most accurate.
It's an awful translation. It's very flowery language, but it's an awful translation. The parts about witchcraft in specific mostly apply to the idea of harmful witchcraft, which is the type of witchcraft that basically the Jews at the time didn't like, which is the stuff that would curse cattle, curse women, cause
ones where
babies
they had
miscarry.
a literal death penalty on. Yeah.
Yes, because those were things that would harm the community. They were against those. Now, this didn't mean that you couldn't go and talk to the woman about a problem with someone cursing you or whatever else. It's just that you couldn't hire her to go and do that. She couldn't do that, legally speaking.
Well, she could, but she'd be executed. Again,
yes.
That's the crime.
There's a lot of this in the ancient world where essentially there's these peoples that will swear up and down that they do not practice any sort of magic and then go on about the magic that they practice for about 30 minutes.
Also,
the Jews are sort of like that.
I was going to say the people that you hate. There's also the people that we despise, we hate. They're awful, they're horrible, but they're essential to our society, and we can't get rid of them.
Yes, and for a lot of basically throughout time and history, the weird old woman with the knowledge of which herbs stop the baby from coming is kind of essential to a community's survival because she prevents people from getting married that shouldn't be getting married, and also people that really don't want to get married from getting married, and also solves problems with other things too, because she often sometimes will have like something on hand that gives you the ability to cure a fever or stop your cow from dying or whatever else, because it's people that generally will pick up a knowledge of herbs and then teach it to somebody else. And oftentimes for people that are elderly in these societies, they've been around long enough to pick up this knowledge, and it's how they support themselves.
Because harvesting that stuff isn't that onerous. I mean, all you have to, for example, the headache cure, it's a distillation of willow bark traditionally.
Yeah, it's easy for them to
Just
get.
Peel it off, you grind it in a mortar and pestle, not too hard, and then stew it as a tea.
Yeah, it's easy to get. It's not too taxing for them, and it's a way they get an income.
And that's why they have little herb gardens as well. In fact, often the old witch would actually have like a small garden of onions and parsley and rosemary, like things that would be seen as ingredients for a potion, when in reality she could just sell it. It's like, here you go, you can add it to your stew. Just chop it up fine, and it'll also make you feel better in bed.
Yeah, like literally, that's how they would support themselves.
Little granny farmer is just being accused. It's
how you would. It's how you would support yourself as an elderly person in a lot of these communities.
Because you grow herbs. They're not high intensity to farm. You can just put them on a windowsill. In bad times, you can eat the onions.
Yeah, admittedly, this also makes you look like a witch because that's the nature of everybody that says that this is a magical thing you're doing. So you see where I'm getting with this, right? So once the paranoia in England really, really, really spikes, which is around, I want to say 1612 or so. This is after James is kind of on his way out.
It's upon James's deathbed before his son takes control.
Yes, because James has tried to merge the Presbyterian and Anglican churches together unsuccessfully. He's published a completely new Bible, which is being devoured and also sort of not being devoured and being called not devout enough by some people. There is a religious mania sweeping Europe, and he is still obsessed with witches. This does not change under his son too much, because that kind of idea that the witches are behind a lot of the bad shit in England has taken root, and it will reap a
And it
bloody
makes a
harvest
lot
during the
of
Civil War.
sense. Yeah, it'll make a lot of sense because his son, Charles, upon ascension, did
Ooh, shit.
things like ban Parliament from gathering
Because
for
they wouldn't
20
approve
years.
because they wouldn't approve his expense report.
I don't have to
The
answer to you if I don't call Parliament.
I can fight a war without having to call Parliament to levy a tax.
It's not
Fuck you.
taxes. They're called investments.
Pay the investment, or I send men to break your legs.
That's literally what he did. He invented
Yeah.
a new method of tax farming to get around actually them being called taxes.
Because also to prevent Parliament from being called, because Parliament was going to cut his expenses.
And on top of that, Charles, unlike James was a fairly devout Presbyterian to a degree, and he wanted to square the circle, like a massive religious stickler man. Charles,
Yes.
on the other hand, not only didn't care too much, but he was very strongly high church to the point where it's hypothesized he was a Catholic, or at least had
There's
Catholic
a lot
sympathies.
of rumors that he was a Catholic. I would say it's more likely that he had Catholic sympathies. Remember, he spent quite a bit of time in Spain because
Catholic
James wanted to marry him off
he was
to.
probably just a high church Anglican.
Yeah,
that had
basically he was
Catholic
just a high church.
sympathies.
He basically just was a high church Anglican, honestly. The
Now
fact
his
of the matter,
grandson was a
his
Catholic.
grandson was probably a Catholic.
Not probably. On his deathbed, he admitted it.
Yeah, though that's those deathbed confessions are a little
Are
more
a bit
dubious to me
strange,
at the era.
dubious, but
Yeah,
at the same time, like there's enough
it
evidence.
does line up. Yeah. So James dies. Charles takes over. Things in England start getting rougher and rougher.
Because Charles is a very different man than James in a lot of
James
ways.
also I want to note that James spent a lot of money. James handed out
Money
a
that he
lot
didn't
of
have.
Yeah, because he didn't really have it, because England was wealthier than Scotland and he was living the life. Charles tries to also live the life, but that's the reason why there's the parliamentary issue, because the king is getting further and further in debt.
Because in Scotland, yeah, there's the
There's the clans, but there's a lot more closer to absolute rule in Scotland than there was in England at the time, mostly because of the nature of the Normans and
Charles
also the nature.
lived in Spain, who had people like Philip II in charge.
Yeah.
So he looks at these people. He looked at the original realm he would have inherited if Bess actually had a husband and heir.
Mm-hmm.
Like if he just ruled Scotland, and he's like, why the fuck should I listen to these uppity little burgers? Look at these.
Yeah, they're not even nobles.
And on top of that, they're pushing me for like more religious ordinances. What the fuck? I don't care.
What's this? In notable rights of the nobility?
You're really telling me there is a such thing as good and evil, and that I'm predestined to go to hell? Fuck you.
Fuck off. Yeah.
Very different
basically,
fellow than his dad. And when he came in power, he rewarded different people, which caused a lot of strife.
Yes. Notably, he got his dad's lover killed. This was a very big political moment in the history of England in many ways, because it was basically, it's not that there's rumors that Charles ordered the hit on him, or if it was just someone who really didn't like him. No one's 100% for sure, but the guy got killed.
And Charles was blamed even if he might not have done it.
Yeah.
Also, that lover, major factor in the reformist part of the Anglican Church.
Yes. This you can kind of see where this one's going. So anyway,
and that's another
Civil
thing.
War kicks off.
Charles, but before the Civil War kicks off, one of the first things Charles does is he does what the Dutch did and kicks the Puritans out. This is actually where it ties back to the Americas.
Yes, he kicks the Puritans out. Then the Civil War starts, and there's even more Puritans
after
in England
20
after
years.
the end
Well,
of
what
it.
happens is 20 years later, he's finally forced, because of his spendthrift ways, to finally call Parliament, because his tax methods aren't working too much anymore.
And he's trying to fight a war with the Dutch.
War.
Yeah.
The Dutch just burned down ships in the Thames. He's embarrassed and annoyed.
They stole several as well.
So He calls Parliament, and Parliament's first reaction is, yeah, first off, before we even do anything, you can't do the bullshit you just fucking did for 20 years.
You have to agree to limit your powers.
You have
We
to
have to
call
authorize
us
a
every
war.
fucking year.
You have to call us every year, and you have to listen to us before you can declare a war.
Because otherwise, because we're just gonna leave if you don't. And Charles's response is, okay, fuck you, and he kicks
Locks
them out
all
again.
up.
Yeah.
He was like, well, I can't disband Parliament? Fine, I'll keep you permanently in session in this building.
Well, you can't.
You can't leave.
So here's a thing that he didn't know: the English standing army had fairly strong Protestant ties.
Yes.
The core of them were small folk, your peasants, your cotters, and they have experienced war.
There's also a lot of people that are coming back from the 30 Years' War, including a English nobleman that will actually side with the Royalists, who was a cavalry officer, and I want to say the Danish army?
See, the core of both armies were on the Parliament side, which were your Roundheads that were called because they had very cheap armor.
And also because they'd like to shave their heads.
Yep. They were the English professional, for what it stood for at the time, military. Not all of it, but a good chunk of it, like the core. And they were led by parliamentarians who managed to escape Charles's little "I lock you up" gambit. On the king's side were the Cavaliers, the nobles, the ones that are much more for the rights.
Landed nobility, mostly.
Because they were tired of these up-jumped fucking merchants that the Tudors elevated through their time in Parliament.
There were, mind you, there were landed nobles on both sides,
it depended on religious affiliation, because
religious affiliation,
more
political
high
affiliation,
church.
Also political affiliation
too.
A lot of the people that liked James didn't like Charles. Same thing, vice versa. Some liked both, some liked neither. Some people were like, we should have made someone else king. Fuck the Scottish. You know, like there's a lot of
that too. But ultimately, to make it simple, the Roundheads
wins.
Parliament. There was the Parliament and then the King. Parliament traditionally had the core of the British army, not the whole thing, a good chunk of it though. And on top of that, enough landed nobility that were Protestant and fucking hated Charles because they liked James. James had primarily the landed elite and cavalry on his side. That's why they're called Cavaliers, because the core of them were actually the English cavalry, not regiments of foot, regiment of horse.
Yeah.
And they tended to be high Anglican or crypto-Catholic or just standard Anglican, because eventually, as the war dragged on, the parliamentarians got more radical, because they're like, at the end of it, fuck kings. We don't need them.
Fuck the king.
We don't need them.
Mind you, the one of the funniest things about the end of the Civil War is that they get Charles on trial.
Yeah, because they were giving him a chance still.
Because they really don't want to kill him. Because they
it's bad policy. It's bad.
Not only it's bad policy,
precedent?
He's still the king.
Yeah.
He
and divine right was still considered. Divine right was still not completely disrespected by this time.
So basically, they get him in a room and they basically say, "You've committed crimes against the country, therefore you need to listen."
You failed in your obligations as king. You failed in your obligations to your subjects.
Yeah, and of course Charles is like, "This is all bullshit. Like, you have no legal right to try me." And
dude, we're going to fucking execute you if you don't do this.
They're basically like, "Look, you need to listen to us," and he's like, "No, no, 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 no."
And they point to the guy with the axe. We're going to chop your goddamn head off.
They don't get to that point quite yet. It takes them a little while to get to that point where there's these pamphlets about the man of blood that must be sacrificed in order for the land to be cleansed, which is a biblical reference that goes around. There's these broadsheets that do it.
I wouldn't be surprised if there was I wish there were posters of Charles in Saul's uniform, like after the Philistines. You remember the bit where King Saul gets wrecked by the Philistines and he's limping, and I think he gets killed by his own men.
Yeah, the man of blood is a reference to some later chapter in the Bible. Anyway, the point being that,
but I could see like a woodblock print of that.
Yeah, the idea of the man of blood was that he's that we need to get rid of him in order for the country to become pure in the eyes of God again. So there's there's this link that becomes established in a lot of these parliamentary broadsheets towards Charles and the Man of Blood. And eventually they have a vote, and it's pretty narrow, and they agree we've got to kill the king.
Especially since
it's a
he's
very
refusing
narrow
to
vote.
surrender.
Because he's not guaranteeing to them that once he gets command of the army back, he's not just going to march on Parliament again. Because they're very worried about this, that he's just going to do this all over again.
Because
they want
guess
a
what? He
concrete
tried it
oath from-
twice already.
Yes, they want a concrete oath from him that he's not going to fucking do this again. We're going to respect the power of you as king, but we want limits on it. And Charles doesn't want any limits whatsoever.
And by the way, they're
he's
actually using legal during the trial. They use legal precedent because remember, this is not the first time the king's power in England was limited.
Yes,
Magna Carta.
there's not only Magna
There's
Carta, but there's
precedent.
other legal codes from other countries that talk about this.
And also
Where-
developments upon the Magna Carta, because as the kings went on throughout the Plantagenets, they would then create their own council, which had their own power too,
Yes.
which would
So-
further devolve. So they had precedent. They weren't even asking for much. It's just, king, you can't dissolve Parliament anymore.
You can't just not call us, and you can't just dissolve us whenever you want.
Like that's
Number one.
That's the big thing.
Number two, we get the right to declare war. You have to come to us to ask to declare war.
That too. And
That
number
was the one that
we-
the second Charles
number three,
called the most.
we must be tried by our own peers,
Yes, that was the other big one.
so that the king
Uh,
couldn't jump them up on a kangaroo court he set up.
Yes. So
In fact,
these
actually,
were,
the core of this would form the English Bill of Rights later, because
yes, it would.
Charles was not the first king to do this.
He was.
Well, he was
yeah.
the first, but the second.
The second Charles to do it. The second Charles to do it. That one actually survived.
No, it was James II that did it.
No, because Charles the First kind of laid the groundwork for. No, Charles II laid the groundwork for James II to do it.
Yeah.
James II kind of
It's just
ignored
Charles
a good chunk of this.
II was good. It's just Charles II was actually aware enough to not completely alienate Parliament,
Yes, Charles II had a few allies in Parliament, and that's what kept him alive.
and James pissed
honestly.
it all away.
Yes. Anyway, point being that at the end of the day, Parliament has a vote, and they all agree that the Man of Blood must die. Charles gets killed. He is the first king that I know of to be subjected to trial and executed in a court of law by his own Parliament.
I think there were a couple of Norwegian kings.
There might have been
were-
a Norwegian king before, but I don't know if you'd call those a parliament, because that was more like a noble council that did that.
Well, it was the thing. It was the thing of the jarls, his peers.
But let's.
Anyway, back to
little
this.
bit
So
back
in
to
the
Salem.
time of the English Civil War, because we got on a diatribe there is a rise in the phenomenon of what's known as the Witchfinder General. The Witchfinder General was Thomas Hopkins, if I think I've got the name right.
I'm going to do a too long to read, but you can do the thing. But essentially, during times of civil strife, conflict, and panic, grifters will take advantage.
Yes. Thomas Hopkins called this with the Witchfinder General, said he had a list of all the witches in England, went around and stole money, basically.
Yeah.
Got a lot of people killed. He wasn't the only one doing this at the time. This witch mania even extended to the colonies. Actually, it's important to note that George Washington's grandfather was on a ship that was crossing the Atlantic when it hit a storm. The ship's sailors immediately blame an old woman on board of being a witch and hang her from the mast and land. And the governor of, I want to say, Boston at the time, tries to figure out a way to put them all on trial, but can't actually do it because he doesn't have a legal standing to do so. So
Because
they
it was
get
done
away
in
with
international waters.
basically because it was done on a ship, so the captain had final authority, and he couldn't challenge that, despite the fact that it was pretty blatantly
His
murder.
Admiralty Court.
Basically,
They
yes,
pulled
it
a
was an admiral.
soft sit.
They kind of
chest
did.
move.
I think he writes about it in his diary as an unfortunate incident or something like that.
An
It
unfortunate.
Also-
happened on his yes, a woman getting dragged out in the middle of a storm and hung from the mast was just kind of an unfortunate incident.
Well, I mean, it was just a woman.
So, some details on Puritans, since we better get you some ideas.
we
why
better
even
get
the
back
Dutch
to this,
hated
but
them.
yes, we
Yeah,
needed to get.
I was going to say, but if we're going with a time period, King's Philip War was only about 20 years ago, a little less than 20 years ago.
Oh yes, that's the other factor. Yes, the natives nearly wiped out the colonies. King Philip's War was, honest to God, the one attempt the natives had to push the English out of North America, and they almost got there. They were very close in many ways to at least forcing a serious reduction in the amount of population of European settlers on the continent. The problem was that more Europeans came over.
Yeah.
So they gave a hell of a fight to try to stop it. It's the most per capita bloody war in American history.
Oh yeah, the Metacomet War.
Yeah, more people died in King Philip's War per capita than any other war in U.S. history. The numbers weren't very big, but that's because the numbers weren't very big in the population.
A few thousand, we're talking.
Yeah, but a few thousand was still like 10% of the colonies.
Yeah. So if you're wondering, the model Puritan, to get an idea on the people we're working with, to be a good Puritan, you have to believe that your corporeal body houses a spirit devoted to God. Your relationship to the divine flows into every aspect of your life, including your marriage. The husband represents the male aspect and speaks with authority to watch over their family and guide them on spirit matters. Women, on the other hand, focus on the material needs of the house as obedient caretakers and humble life givers. Children have a special relation with God and should get closer to him through education and obedience. So in a way, you can also, while they're awful in a lot of ways, these people are kind of responsible for the public school system.
They are. They actually do push public schooling.
They're one of the first proponents, yes.
Mostly because they wanted it to be religious education.
And also, it was required, their belief was you had to at least be able to read that King James Bible.
Yes, you had to be able to read the Bible to understand it, to accept the words of salvation yourself, basically, which is an interesting concept.
It's one of their few virtues.
It's an interesting concept, and it's well known. It's more known for like the fact that the Puritans were able to read the Bible is part of the reason why this kind of all goes absolutely fucking nuts.
Thank you, Jamie, for making your terrible witch hunter segment. Also, you have to avoid alcoholism and extramarital sex because you'd be publicly humiliated for your crimes. You don't celebrate Christmas, birthdays, or any other holiday. You don't attend or post gatherings that include idle activities, including games and theatrical performances either. And if you find any one of your fellow Puritans engaging in those acts, it's your duty to report them to your leader.
Yes, they are the no fun allowed crowd. And this is what leads to a lot of the problems in colonial England, colonial America, is that these guys are so no fun assholes that it leads to a lot of repression in the society and people doing things surreptitiously that are considered like, oh, I had a drink today. I am an evil person in the eyes of my community. I did a dance.
Alternatively, you go to the main shoreside town, and you're dragged into by sailors to have some drinks. Your neighbor sees you and then reports you to the town fucking elder, despite you trying to get out of there, and now you're shunned by the entire village.
Because a couple of sailors forced you into a bar. You didn't even drink. They just dragged you in there.
Because they were celebrating getting a big payoff.
And you were doing business with them or whatever, and that happened, and now you are shunned by the church elders, and you are as much as you confess that you never did this openly,
they're not going to believe you.
They're not going to believe you.
The word of a liar.
Yeah, because you are obviously lying. Someone saw you go into that bar,
or claim they see you go into the bar.
Yeah,
you might not have even done it. You might have actually gone into another building or not at all. They might have just made it up.
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, the attitude of paranoia in revolutionary England comes over to colonial America very much. And
this is 20 years. This is not only 20 years after their death war to survive against Metacomet. This is 40 years after the Civil War.
Yes.
Oh, and actually, it's just a couple years after the king proved to be a godless papist and had to be kicked out by a Dutchman.
Yes. So there's also that political strife going on that you've probably heard of vaguely. You might not fully know it, but you know that
the king was a papist. Kicked out as a papist and a devil's agent.
It's fucking everywhere, man. They're in the walls.
The king himself is fallible.
Yes. The divine agent of God was fallible. Let's repeat that. The divine agent of God, it was fallible. Everything is now up to question. All of your beliefs are now up on the air. This is like nothing is true. Nothing is also permitted.
One more moment of horseshit. These colonies, before the Papist king got kicked out, the Papist king forced them into becoming one fucking colony.
That's the other thing, yes. They're no longer just the colony of this village and this town and this area. It's now you are Massachusetts, whatever the fuck that means. I've just got it on a letter
New
here.
England, because Massachusetts and Rhode Island were two different ones, and I think
Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, and Vermont. No, Vermont was a later state.
New
Was
Hampshire
Maine?
though.
New Hampshire, yeah. Because I'm trying to remember if Vermont was a colony or if it was not.
Vermont
Because
was
I know Maine wasn't.
Vermont was the battleground between French and British and English loggers.
Yeah, it
There
was a
wasn't
bunch of
an
logging bros
established
out in
area.
the. Yeah, it was a bunch of logging bros getting together, getting drunk, and yelling at each other a lot. Sounds a lot like modern Vermont, honestly.
By the way, Impsit does agree. King James I sounds massively autistic because he wrote a book
He
about
was.
witches. Because
He not only wrote a book about
bad
witches, he wrote
rainstorm.
wrote a book about witches not only because of that, but also because he could, basically, and on top of that, also wrote several things about theology, which are less well known and less interesting than him whining
Yeah, it's
about
a very
witches.
interesting hot takes, essentially.
Yeah, it's a lot less interesting than him whining about witches for no reason, which is just kind of genuinely funny that a king does this.
Oh, here's another thing that happens after William gets the throne. There's King Philip's War, which, Death War, but there's also the 7 Years William's War.
Yes, there is.
King William's War, which, while not as bad, it still fucked up upstate New York and some of the northern parts of.
There are several major witch stories relating from this time period of old women who cursed men going off to war to get shot, basically.
Because they saw their husbands die against natives. They don't want to see that again.
Well,
because it's
in
their
this
sons
case,
this time.
The most famous story is of this old woman who they shoved her in the street because they were slightly drunk, and so she cursed them. And also, because, well, of course you would. You're an old woman, and these
It's
fucking drunk
I hope
young
those
men
natives
shoved
scalp you.
It was more like, I hope you die in battle, I think was what one of them said. And they say, one of them says that they claim they saw her in the form of a bird over there, and they shot her because they remembered that she cursed them to be attacked or something like that. And apparently back home, someone said that, yeah, no, her arm got broke. She fell and broke her arm at that time. That's like it's literally like little things like that get added into like some of these witch stories.
The best way to describe witch hunting logic by the normals, even in Chronicles of Darkness setting, it is the Pepe Sylvia conspiracy from It's Always Sunny.
It is literally a picture on a board with random red lines of string.
And
she said my hogs were awful once, therefore she is a witch.
No, she said my hogs look sickly, and one of them died. Ergo, she cursed them.
Yes. There's
actually... It can't be that my hogs were in fact sickly.
There's also one woman who is accused of being a witch because she turned into a hog and chased someone. Because there's a big black hog that chased someone out of a forest, which, of course, a true man would never run from a beast like that. So, therefore, it had to be a witch casting a spell on him. I'm not joking.
That you're joking. You're not joking, but this reminds me. Less than 20 years ago, there was an article in a Central African nation where a man accused a woman of witchcraft because he accused her of being turning into a donkey while he was having relations with her, ignoring that he was caught with his pants down with the donkey.
That's also a part of this sort of stuff, is that a lot of these accusations of witchcraft are basically a way to avoid being ostracized from your community for something you did that's against the norm. Like, oh, I was acting drunk. No, I wasn't drunk. A witch had befuddled me. Like stuff like that. Like, it's literally ways to get out of social consequences.
It's a get out of jail free card. Just blame the women.
Blame the witch.
The women.
There's no witch around the area. That doesn't matter.
There's always a witch.
There's always some convenient old woman that everyone hates but just keeps around so they can keep blaming her. I'm not kidding on that one either. There's a famous woman who was arrested, I think, 30, 40 times on witchcraft, but none of the trials reached the death penalty because even the court was like, this is some really fucking flimsy evidence you have of her being
trash.
a witch.
And actually, I kind of wish that the final response after the 38th trial, they go, oh, no, this is your first trial for witchcraft yourself, because you're clearly befuddling the court with the amount of paper you're wasting. Like they tax them as a vexatious litigant, litigant.
Basically, it kind of got to that point. She had basically a permanent spot, and if I want to remember the Boston jail, there was like literally a cell just kind of assigned to her because she just spent so much time there. Her husband died while she was in prison, and she didn't know for like 6 months because she was stuck there. She was released because he died, and they just didn't bother telling the court for 6 months that her husband had died. The court actually, I think, ordered them to build a new house for her because she was gone for that time and the house fell into disrepair, so they had to repair it for her. Which
I bet they felt really stupid the amount of money they wasted trying to get rid of her.
It's funny because like they never actually fined her because she couldn't pay any fines, so they just kept her in jail. So because a lot of the things that she was accused of weren't really capital crimes caused by witchcraft,
even
which
a crime in the colony charter.
Oh no, it was still a crime technically to be a witch, but like there was no at this time sort of there wasn't the association of being a witch meant death because well if you did then every old woman's going to hang. Like the point being that the town witch was kind of kept around just as an excuse in many cases. I feel almost.
So speaking of trash, chosen versus unchosen.
Yes.
So here's the thing about Puritans, which is why the Dutch kicked them out. So the Puritan villages had two classes. Most Puritans were the chosen because they believed in their hibbity. Anyone who lived among them, though, who did not believe their specific strain of hibbity, were unchosen, and they were always the first lined up for crimes. By the way,
being witches.
This is not an unusual thing. They would actually be executed for something as simple as swearing.
Yes.
Why do you think the Dutch kicked them out?
Yes, because they were constantly getting into fights. I want to also note that the as we're talking about all this, the fact of the matter is that all of this unrest and all of this tensions is also coming with the nature of the relation with the native population after the war. Because for some people, how they make their money is going to the natives and trading with them.
Yeah, I mean, you trade them simple like metal tools, and you'd get a shitload of fur from them, or this mineral that you can't get at otherwise.
And also, you have to note that among the natives there were Catholic preachers sometimes. One of which was
French
actually
were
accused.
well known for doing this. Yeah.
Yes, one of the fun things to note about early witchcraft in America is that there was a Catholic priest accused of being a witch by the local native population because he left a box with them at one time and then bad things happened to them. So they accused him of being a witch and executed him. I'm serious.
That's
were
pretty
they Catholic
awesome.
converts? Were they Catholics or?
No, I don't think
he was
they
preaching
were.
among them. They weren't.
I think that they believed when he was talking about the dangers of witchcraft, and they went, "Oh, he's also a witch," and just kind of killed him.
He was preaching among them, and then a bad thing happened because he left something there, and they interpreted, "Oh yeah, he was talking about witchcraft. He's a witch. Let's kill him."
He must be a witch.
There's other native prophets that pop up and occasionally will do the same thing. They'll actually create their own witch trials in their own communities. And then get really mad.
The Europeans did it, so why can't we?
Yes, they got really mad at the Europeans when the Europeans went to them and said, "You're doing this completely wrong. They're not witches." And like, you'd never like come the fuck on. You told us about witches. These are obviously witches. Like,
yeah, if that's not a witch, then what if we? Then who have we been murdering this whole time, huh?
Yeah.
Also, there are native hunters because, again, even among the native tribes, it's probably equivalent to how Grog Mage works. It'd be Grog Hunter.
Yeah.
There are native hunters, those who basically protect the tribe from horrible things that walk the woods and the plains. And, yeah, they have to deal with the hunters have to deal with these new hunters, or old hunters, I should say.
Yeah, because the natives have their own. And they know 100% about the monsters that are in the woods here. And now the white guys brought their own fuckers with them. And it's like, oh, you fucking assholes. Like,
and on top of that, they're killing off and agitating those other things they perfectly know well about. Like, oh yeah, those werewolves that are destroyed that village, they wouldn't have done it if they didn't actually accidentally release the spirit they fucking sealed away years ago.
It's like we had a deal with the werewolves that we don't go into that forest, and they fucking broke it.
They cut it down. They cut it down to build a farm.
Have to deal with. Yeah, and now we have to deal with the werewolves, and because the werewolves don't care that they broke it, because they never made the promise. The werewolves care because we made a promise and it got broken, even if it wasn't by us.
Thanks to you, those fucking Wendigos. I'm just making up the term. In this parlance, it'd be like a Cree tribe talking about vampires because flesh eater, blood drinker, similar. Thanks to these assholes,
Yeah.
they're fucking Wendigos are profligating. They're
Yeah.
hiding among them.
They're among us. Everything is sus.
Yeah, I mean, originally it was just easy. You just killed the weirdo who never showed up. Yeah, originally you just killed the tribe member who only woke up at night.
Who acts funny, yeah. Now, the fact of the matter too to remember is that Cotton Mather is very important in this, and I seriously recommend looking into this man. It's a little nuts. He may have dissected his own child after they died to determine the cause of death. He probably performed the first autopsy recorded in colonial America on his own child.
Yeah.
Which is really sad and really depressing. And he blamed a witch for the death.
Oh yeah, by the way, if you're wondering, he was heavily involved in one of the first major witchcraft trials of Salem.
Yeah, Anne Glover was one of the first ones. Cotton Mather was involved in her death, and the story of Anne Glover is a really depressing one. Like really, really depressing. She was probably a Catholic. She was from Ireland, if I remember correctly. She couldn't speak English extremely well. She was speaking, of course, Irish Gaelic at the time mostly. And she was basically a slave that was sent over. And because of the fact that she was both Catholic and couldn't speak English properly, they thought she was speaking the language of the devil. And because she couldn't say the Lord's Prayer, because she didn't know it in English, but she knew it in Gaelic for sure, they executed her. Because they thought she was a witch.
And Cotton, the asshole that he is, wrote about this and inspired more Puritans to do this.
Yeah.
Which then leads to the thing I keep referencing: the years they got fucked on DMT. Okay, so if you're wondering, the years between 1688 to 1693 were very wet and rainy years in New England at the time. Extremely rainy. We're talking 1.5 to 2 times the normal. It was cold and wet, and there's a specific type of fungus that grows on, well, let's go into it. They mostly farmed rye, which was the poor man's wheat, because wheat was saved for the rich man's bread. That was for rich people. If you were poor, like the Puritans were, because, you made a lot of enemies and you didn't have a lot, and also it made you feel good to show off how humble you are, you would eat rye, barley, and oat. And rye was very popular because you can make breads out of that. Now, there's a specific species of fungus that grows on rye called ergot. And ergot has a toxin in it that is actually chemically similar. It's actually mostly the chemical that forms LSD.
It will make you trip fucking balls.
Not only that, it makes you hallucinate, but it also makes it feel like your nerves are on fire, and you're in constant gastric pain.
You feel like absolute fucking shit. You are probably vomiting horrifically at this time. So you're dehydrated on top of all this.
One of two things could happen. You're ranting and raving, might be heard by your neighbors, and they're going, "Oh no, the devil has spoken with them." That's one option in how you get put to the trial. Or alternatively, during your hallucinations, that weird Frenchman that talks with them natives, he's the one who's doing it. He's haunting your dreams and laughing at you in the devil language when he's really just speaking French. He's the one who's doing this.
Well, I mean, French is the devil's language, so let's not.
Let's be fair, it is, but
yeah, it is. But yes, the point being that
either you were tried because you acted like a crazy person, ergo you're a witch, or the people you saw in your nightmares, in your drug nightmares from poisoned grain, which you ate regularly, by the way. Those guys are the ones that cause your pain. And you accuse them. And because they're not chosen, it's a lot easier for that charge to fucking stick.
And not only is it easier to stick, there's also the fact of the matter is that legal cases at this point are very wonky.
Because remember, the colonies were just redistributed into one entity just a few years ago.
Not only that,
what charters apply, what legal code, because the legal codes were different for each one. What charters apply, what legal code applies where? Does my town work with the Massachusetts, with the Bay Charter, or does it use the old charter?
let's also not forget the fact that the line between a civic and a liturgical court, like a church court, was not really that firm in the colonial era, especially among the Puritans. So there's a lot of evidence.
They didn't respect high church. They thought that it was all corrupt.
So the line between what is acceptable evidence and what should be thrown into a court of like liturgical matters compared to a court of like basically heretical stuff, like that sort of thing, to the amount of like what is a actual like lawsuit about a physical illness or a physical pain that someone's called each other, they're all getting tried in the same court. So it's getting wonkier that way.
From IMSIT, DMT sold by the native, one who factor sphere.
Yeah. Now, what's even better when you look into all this is that Salem itself, if you keep going down here, they'll talk about that that Salem itself is a misspelling of the word shalom. I'm serious.
That's an interesting hot take.
No, it's right in here in the book.
No, I mean, it's an interesting hot take that they had.
Yeah, Anglicization is really weird, because it's often in this period, spelling rules do not matter whatsoever, which makes translating, or more accurately, updating into a readable fashion some of these early colonial texts almost impossible, because there's no firm rules on how to spell or pronounce about anything.
You say that, but the same applies to the English language in general. Need I remind you, there's a village called Haysboro that's spelled with 2 P's.
Haysboro, but spelled with 2 P's. What the fuck?
It's Haysboro, which is pronounced that way, and then it's spelled Happipibburgh.
Why are there 2 P's in it?
I don't know. Why do you pronounce Worcester as Worcester when it has an RCESTR? It should be Worcester, God. But it's not. It's Worcester.
What the fuck is with English? I don't even know.
See,
like,
we think the French is the devil language, and it is. Does that mean English is the demon's language?
Probably.
It's the chaotic, evil language.
Yeah. There's also the fact that when we go into the nature of all this,
when we're talking about like the Knights of St. George.
Yeah, the Knights of St. George are from.
Who are a covenant in this game?
They're a conspiracy, much like the Malleus Maleficarum and the Canaanite heresy and all of those guys that they talked about earlier, like Lucifer. The Knights of St. George are in the Mage book, witch hunters. They're basically worried about the mages summoning the apocalypse.
Which is, to be fair, if you get a bunch of them, that can happen.
Yeah, so they're implying that the Knights of St. George are involved in the trials of the Salem witch trials, which
makes sense. They hate mages.
Yeah, mind you, it's sense. It's also like there's a certain amount of like this could be really good. You might not want to ever involve any of this into your chronicle if you're doing this,
because this could be a vampire warlord in Chechnya.
Yeah, like they don't. I don't think that they go to that level.
Vampire single-handedly foments and creates the rise of Germany in World War I and II.
He ensures the rise of Adolf Hitler because he just wants to.
A guy told him his painting was mediocre.
I still think that is incredibly funny. I just don't think it's incredibly. I don't think it's good for a game line.
I think it's insultingly stupid.
It's funny, yeah. Like, it's ridiculous.
It's not in the good way.
Yeah.
And then they go into detail about Salem town itself.
Yes, Salem itself is about because there's two. There's the town.
There's town and
village. That's the other thing to remember is that there's a lot of tension between the townsfolk and the village folk. Yep, Salem Village town is where most of the people that are going nuts are at this point, and the town's a little more
Sane-ish.
Well,
They're
yeah,
still pretty nuts, but
sane-ish.
they want a second opinion before they burn the witch. They don't instantly want to burn the witch. They might suspect they are a witch, but they want a second confirmation usually.
Yeah, it's important to note that Salem town itself as well is...
It's not a big town. It's only 2,000 at the time.
Yeah,
I mean, which is
but
big for the time, but...
But it's actually pretty well traveled. It's a place where a lot of people will stop over when traveling up the seaboard.
And it's right around the time before Boston took over. Salem was one of the major regions of New England at the time.
It was more that it was used as a stopping off point for a lot of people. Like there's travelers and trappers and traders and people coming in from.
It potentially could have become the main nexus point if Boston didn't steal it from them.
Well, it's also that Boston had a better harbor.
That too.
That's the real key reason why Boston took over, is that Boston could take deeper ships.
But it wasn't at the time.
Yes. Boston would have become a bigger port inevitably, but whether it would have been the main town is the question. In any case, there's...
And there's different beliefs too.
Mm-hmm.
Because...
You might run into a Roman Catholic at some point.
God!
Because Salem town, while still surrounded by Puritans, they're more aware.
There's more travelers.
There's more
basically.
Travelers. They're more familiar with different people. And on top of that, the king's law is a lot
dirty
firmer
papist! A dirty papist!
They don't live there. They'll just travel through there. They'll stop to get supplies or to trade you things.
There's also the fact that the king's law is still here. It is actually much more established. There's actually a court here, for example.
Yes, which is the court that is the main focus of the Salem witch trials, in fact.
You tolerate a dirty papist? Oh.
Witchfinder General. Who's that Uttenshire that does the bit where you...
Uttenshire, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. It's memetics. It's a meme, so yeah.
Or Brazilian police using vampires as an excuse to oppress the poor. Yeah, that's a thing in Hunter 5th edition.
I don't know why.
I don't want to talk about it.
They can oppress the poor just fine on their own. They don't need vampires for that.
The best part is the person who wrote that doesn't understand how
anything about
nasty the BOPE is. Okay, just a very quick tangent. I don't want to distract too much from this. There is a great movie that one of our Brazilian watchers has recommended, which perfectly emphasizes how the BOPE is. The Pope is visiting Rio, and to kind of clear the way and prevent any problems, they clean out some of the nearby favelas of drug traffickers and gang militia. One of the lookouts is a boy who I think literally just a 13-year-old boy, and any hesitation is killed by the leader just going, put him on the Pope's tab, and they just fucking kill him off screen. There's another lady who represents them in a video game who slices a man's throat open with no remorse. That's actually pretty fucking accurate to them as terms of how they act.
Rainbow Six Siege. The other one is an eye patch wielding man that sets everything on fire.
All perfectly normal for BOPE.
No, it's right. Eye patch wearing man with a crossbow that sets things on fire, which sounds very BOPE.
Yeah, the fact that they tried to make them a hunter group is kind of disgusting. It would make sense as you could totally see that because Chronicles does that, but that's getting
they could work it in the same way they worked. I forget that the conspiracy. Essentially, it's the politicians fighting the vampires, not
Unit
because
18.
Because how dare they manipulate the voting registry? That's my job.
Oh no, that's the
Barrett
Commission.
Yeah, the Barrett Commission.
Unit 18
that's
is
what
the
reminded
Hong
me.
Kong
How
police.
dare these vampires be blood-sucking monsters that take away everything from the poor? That's our job!
There's Unit 18, which is the Hong Kong police that does the same thing.
Yeah, which is actually pretty well written.
Which, let me tell you, Sao Paulo by night, where you have the hunter, the BOP has a hunter subunit. Oh, they made them a hunter antagonist?
Well, yeah, because the hunters are the people that they might mistake for
they want to make them
gangers.
the heroes because they don't understand no one's a good person in World of Darkness.
Well, honestly,
here's the thing. But there's bad and better people.
One of the things about playing a hunter is that you have to remember that the feds will see the fact that you're buying a bunch of explosives and looking up the address of a local politician and be like, "Oh shit," when in reality that politician's a ghoul. Like, yeah, you're gonna blow the shit out of him, right? Well, the feds see this and they see you as a domestic terrorist. Like,
Yeah, like you're
that's
not
part
a
of the
good
nature of
person as
Hunter.
Hunter.
You're not always a good person as Hunter. You will be doing
Not
some.
always. Not always. Or no.
Oh God.
The longer you're in the field, the worse
The
of a
more
human
likely you are to be
become.
like, that orphanage. Yeah, there was a vampire in it. Set it on
Collateral
fire. It's
damage.
fine. It's collateral damage.
So anyway,
Um,
they actually go into details on the town itself. That's
yes, they do.
you
The
know,
Salem bed
I
and
have to
breakfast.
point this out. This is what the Viking Age werewolf is tried to be.
Yes,
But this is actually a really good time frame for Hunter.
it is. It's a fantastic time frame for Hunter. There's the frontier to explore. There's a lot of stuff going on inside the colonies at this point.
And that's why the werewolf one doesn't work. The werewolf Viking doesn't work because it's a fucking town in Ireland during Brian Border's death run.
Yeah,
The literal
it's a very
ass end of Viking shit.
like if it was earlier, if it was the Great Heathen Army, it would be fantastic.
Or during the rise of Alfred the Great.
Yes, again, either of those time periods would be fantastic because that's the time when the Vikings are going everywhere, and including a raid on Rome. Well, actually,
and then
not
you
on
can
Rome,
do
on
like
Paris.
a couple
They
of
never
example
they never
towns.
got there, but
Well, they got into the Mediterranean actually pretty far in.
They actually sacked several towns in Sicily, from what I remember.
Yes, they did. There was even a
In
Viking
fact, actually,
raid.
there's a notorious Viking who, during his reaving in southern Italy, faked his own fucking death. He faked his own fucking death so that he may be buried because his own crewmen lied through their teeth to the priest of this one church that
Yes.
as he was dying, he saw Jesus and gave his final grace, and he wanted to be buried in a Christian.
Buried as a Christian,
tomb.
yes. And the priest believed them. The priest fucking bought it, which I think is the funniest thing.
What's there to think about? He obviously was repentant.
So they prepare him for funerary rites. He then gets up, holds them hostage, and demands they open the church so they can loot the shit out of it. And this was a church that had artifacts as early as the 2nd century AD. When it comes to early Christian, we're talking saints' bones from the fucking 200s and gold.
It was like, it is one of the funniest stories because that kind of emphasizes the Viking nature of we will just fuck it. If it works, it works. And sometimes it's we're lucky they're just so stupid.
Yeah, that's why that's disappointing, but this works. This is the perfect time period.
Yeah.
And they go into details about the town because Salem is very important for this.
Salem is Salem is the nexus of this whole thing. There's other witch trials happening across the colonies, but Salem's the big one.
And on top of that, it's not too far out from the weird stuff, the high weirdness of the outside.
Yes, it's also that Salem is very well known. You can actually visit Salem today, and they have a replica of a map and replica of some of the stuff and the people that were there. Because there's a lot of stuff written about this.
If you want to do a period piece for any of the Chronicles of Darkness, if you wanted to do, say, Boston by not even gaslight, Boston by torch, 17th century colony stuff. This is you're right within that area for that too.
Yes, you can go there. They even talk about Boston.
And they go into details. There's the bed and breakfast, the very noted one where you go if you just
there's the public tavern, which no one likes, but they go.
The watering
hole. People will visit too. The
supply store, which is
openly
critical.
seen. Yeah, you can't be openly seen doing it, but you can go in there.
I forget. Did the Puritans ban smoking?
I think they did. It's not a surprise, honestly, because you've got to consider their nature of the idea of intoxicants. Also, interestingly enough, King James himself did not like smoking. James I.
That's something That's something people kind of forget.
He declared it. He tried it, and he's like, "It's a noxious habit. I don't like it."
Then here's some bit players. There's the town drunk. Aw, he's a war veteran. He's gonna be put to trial.
He's disabled. He's drunken, and he's basically
An
like,
info broker. You literally give
yeah,
him some booze and he'll tell you all the dirty secrets.
yeah. Of course, the other thing about him is that literally his wife and child are probably either died from murder, or a disease, or a monster. Pick your whatever you want for that plot thread.
There's the experienced scout who definitely isn't much liked in the area.
He's just lucky, and also he can
He's
actually speak
massively French
Algonquin.
too.
He's also incredibly French. And then there's Goody Ainsworth, a very superstitious midwife. This is the other big thing, which is that midwifery was a very, very common trade in this era. For very obvious reasons, childbirth was incredibly dangerous, and having someone who knew about it, even as like around, increased the chance of survival substantially.
She also, though, isn't a perfect Puritan because she brought over some of the very classic old-timey English horror stories and legends.
Yes.
Which, fun fact, actually, some of them survived, like Bloody Bones. Bloody
Yes.
Bones was from England.
Yes, and it's important to note that some of the other townspeople think that this is not great.
Well, on top of that, she's often considered kind of suspicious, despite her attempts to disguise herself as a great. I mean, she's not a pure disbeliever in Puritanism, though.
No, she's a very ardent Puritan.
It's
She's
just she has some
not
weird
perfect.
beliefs that make people look at her.
Yeah.
And then there's Salem Village, which, much nastier. It's considered to be an agricultural suburb. The villagers' interpretations of the supernatural here, a blend of Christian and folk beliefs, has called strife and rift within the town. It's full of
working the fields all day, they basically attribute everything to the fucking devil. And
Why wouldn't they?
like,
Why wouldn't they? How else could they explain why the rain stopped?
By the way, the first witchcraft, like, people usually blame the girls. Though the first actual start of the witch trials was a doctor.
the doctor believed them. Yeah, that's the other thing. Somebody made a point that like the main thing about the trials to note is that there were a lot of points when somebody could have stepped in and said, "This is getting ridiculous,"
but they fucking
and it
didn't.
never happened because the nature of the belief at the time of in the devil, in the witchcraft, in the culture at the time, it was irrefutable to the point where people who were realizing this is getting out of hand were accused of being witches themselves.
What else could it be?
Including Cotton Mather, of all people, I think, if I remember correctly.
He was eventually tried and executed. Yeah.
No, Cotton Mather was not executed. Cotton Mather is the preacher who wrote a lot about this. He's the guy that was mentioned earlier that wrote like the account in 1689.
Oh yeah, but even he was like, "Holy shit."
Yeah, he's kind of an interesting thing. He was also, interestingly enough, one of the early Harvard grads.
Oh yeah, back when the Ivy League schools were literally just, you're too poor to actually leave for England.
You're too poor for England, but but you want to be educated.
But your family's
We've got the school
rich
for you.
enough. Yeah, your family's rich enough that they gathered together to get some second-rate flunkies from the university who never could have actually taught there to establish these little areas.
Yeah. It's also important to note that Mather was a very firm believer in the supernatural at this time. He was a very respected churchman, and it's interesting to note he was pro-vaccine.
Well, yeah, the thing is that the anti-vax movement was started by a fucking Playboy bunny. People forget that.
Yeah, he was a very firm advocate for inoculation against smallpox.
Yeah, that's another thing people forget. Smallpox has been vaccinated against since the fucking 16th century, not 16th, early 17th century.
Yeah, smallpox is one of the most horrific ways you can possibly die, honestly. There's a reason why a lot of these people advocated, like, even the very dangerous practice of inoculation to avoid that.
Well, the original concept was based on inoculation from cattle because
Yes, it was.
it was discovered a couple hundred years prior that if you put a bit of disease into the cow, just a little bit, there's a chance it may catch the disease and die, but it's also a chance that it doesn't. And then you note that that cow doesn't get sick from it again.
Yeah,
And this was eventually then logically extended to slaves because why experiment on yourself, God forbid, when you can experiment on
Yeah.
slaves.
It's interesting to note that actually Mather was explained about vaccination by one of his slaves who recounted the practice to him, because he'd been inoculated back in Africa as a child, and Mather was really interested in this, so he started to look up other accounts of this, and then realized, oh, this is a real thing. This is actually going on in here, and sends like letters and all this advocating for the practice, and including like he wrote like a bunch of letters to like Boston to basically advocate to do it because there was a big smallpox plague about 30 years earlier, and he's like, we need to do this before it happens again. Which, Mather's an interesting character in and of himself, and I don't know if they cover him directly, but worth reading what he wrote about this period if you're going to be going for the full nature of it. But also that doctors themselves, this is the point where a demon cursed you and that's why you're sick, is still a valid explanation.
Oh yeah, this is before a lot of things were discovered
There's
about
ghosts
medicine.
in your blood.
We're not even kidding. That's an actual diagnosis.
Yeah. Miller's Farm is a note here.
Oh
Let's
yeah,
get into
because
this.
I think this actually is a real historical figure, Goody Miller, because she was like one of the first to be tried and killed. Because unlike her peers, her farm.
Yeah. Her farm was always working, and because they actually practiced relatively better agriculture, I guess.
On top of, well, it could have been that, or it could have just been the soil wasn't as fatigued since it was a new farm. It had time to rest.
Or they gave it time to rest.
Either
Sometimes
way,
there were
her
farmers that
crops
would
did
accidentally
better,
do that shit. Yeah. One of the other things to note about it is that there's
there
the
are
witch
hints
caves.
that the devil might walk among her fields because there's horrible lights that can be floating over the crops.
There's kind of some natural caves around the area, which they consider the spawn of Satan. Which, Puritans.
The bloody handprints on its walls and bones strewed aside across the floor.
Kind of notice it. Because we've been saying, how would you note the art of this section compared to the other ones?
It's actually quite good.
I've seen a little bit. There's more, but I like the writing. I have only seen a bit of the art.
The art's not bad, honestly. Like, I think it's pretty good.
Yeah.
There's only been 2 pieces of it so far, but they're pretty good. So
there's the opening. There's the witch on in the burning tree, and now there's.
Well, you might be further ahead. Yeah, you're further ahead.
Yeah, you're a little further ahead. We're just going to cover the next bit.
It was under locations, just right next to locations. Okay.
Yeah, well, no, you're ahead. I'm at.
You're a little bit ahead. We're just getting into Ipswich, but basically they talk about like the Gallows Hill,
which is where
60. By the way, I want to note this: since the village was first built, 60 people have already been executed here. From adultery to theft were crimes that were considered worth execution.
Gotta love the Puritans, and there's a reason the Dutch kicked them out.
Yeah, because for most places like this, adultery would be maybe a beating, like a really severe beating.
A good caning.
Or at the very worst, the husband would kill the adulterer.
Yep.
That would often happen where you'd get that sort of thing, and then the community would move on. The Puritans put everyone involved to death that wasn't the husband, usually.
The husband who didn't cheat.
Yeah.
Everyone but the cuckold.
Basically, which kind of got a little bit nuts at some points. Now,
especially since swearing, like just saying "damn it," you could also
get
be
beaten.
hanged until dead.
It also gets much worse if people start accusing the children of being bastards. Then.
Yeah. Now it's also notable that that theft was a capital crime. It's not a surprise.
Because in the slightest bit of fairness, they are kind of etching out into existence.
Yeah, like it's not a surprise. Theft being a capital offense Not a surprise.
I mean, to give you an
Everyone needs
idea,
that.
this isn't that far from the time where you'd lose a finger or hand.
Yeah.
These are very communal societies, so doing anything that could harm the survival of the group was considered just as
Yeah.
bad as being a sinner.
So on our list of bit players, a Dutch carpenter,
Yep.
Who is still looking for a wife and publicly chimes in about things, talks a lot, has a craft of carpentry 4 and a
Which means
brawl
he's
and
really good.
persuasion of 2. He's a very good carpenter for the area, yes. And then a farmer's daughter who is gossipy, and there's a friend who's talking about the fact that they've got like 5 cats and it's weird, and then she reads the books other than the Bible, and she's
that's
looking
why
into
she's
herbs.
almost certainly going to get killed.
There's some fear that she might be accused of being a white witch, which was still, because again, as I mentioned before, among most societies with this sort of thing, a white witch is the local crazy old woman you tolerate because they can heal your cow when it's sick. Like, you don't like them, and if you think that they cursed you, they're probably going to die, but you tolerate them. And the Puritans did, to a degree, tolerate their own witches too. It's just that, well,
Not during this period.
yeah, this is when it starts to escalate. Now, sometimes you get the woman around Boston who's accused of being a witch 50 times and gets convicted, and
Also,
just
don't
as
forget that
present.
there's one night watchman.
Yep, there is a night watchman. There's a strict curfew in a lot of these areas. Mostly because they're worried about night raids from the natives, which did happen
Less than
often
20 years,
enough.
and they had a death war with them less than 20 years ago.
Yes, then there's Ipswich, which is a much more
It's much more sane.
rational. Yeah, it's sane. Basically, they're kind of like, this isn't really that dumb, and also they're the ones that have the local jail.
And that's the reason why they're a lot more rational about it, because they can wait by locking them in until the king's justice is met.
Yes, they don't bother. Most of the all prisoners have to spend the time. They're usually whipped. They're usually given shitty food, and if you get trying to escape, you get branded, which was not unusual at the time.
Ipswich Gal, there's not. It's not a big prison. It's just it
It's
is a
two-story
prison,
building.
which is useful.
Yeah, and it is the only prison in the area, and it also doubles this as the local fort.
On top of that, it's also likely haunted because it's been said that you can still hear the screams of some of those who have been executed there.
Yep. It holds 24 cells. So there you go. There's also the Dun Bridge, which is also supposedly haunted. It's a natural formation, actually, at the time.
It's a natural archway, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if it's still around. At the time it was noted.
I think it wore down, but you can still see the ends of it.
Yeah. And
it's rumored that there's a ghost that waits on the other side for a lost lover.
Yeah. Then there's another haunted cemetery, which belonged originally to an English nobleman. And then maybe used in religious ceremonies. And then, well, the only person there is Bill Carter, who probably is made up. But hey,
there is something creepy about. There's some really. I like the rumors. Crypts opening of their own accord. The dug graves ejecting mud and ash from them.
And headstones flipping upside down. That's a really creepy one, honestly. Like,
I love it.
Because you wouldn't notice that at first either. It's like, wait a second, that's upside down. What the fuck? You know?
They go into details about the jailer or Gowler.
Yep. By the way, he has a fun craft torture devices 3.
And in his opinion, no one's without guilt, so he'll force a confession however he wishes.
Yeah, the Gravedigger was a soldier of the British Army and first sailed to Boston. Took to the bottle in his second campaign, declared unfit for duty, discharged, and then stuck.
He's actually a hunter, yeah.
Yes, he is. He is very old. He stopped drinking, but he's arthritis riddled 70-year-old man that digs graves for a living. I mean, there's some stories you can use with this character. I like it.
I don't know why Elizabeth is called a British loyalist. This isn't the time of the revolution.
He's very super pro-British, I guess, because there is moves for semi-autonomy in the colonies, basically.
Okay, fair enough. I just think it's a little ridiculous to use that term at this time period.
Basically, this is someone that thinks that the British authority in the end always matters. Like we should go directly to them and not the. I
Which
guess it's
makes sense because these are the parochials murdering people. She's probably
Yes.
the ones like, let's send this to the court, the
And there's
English court.
there's already some tensions with the crown and the colonies at this point, mostly over not taxes necessarily, but like land rights, like whose colony belongs to which land and that sort of
Oh
thing.
yeah, and because that's the thing. Each king, when they come into power, has a different idea on how the colonies should be drawn.
Yeah,
For
and
those
so like
wondering,
the borders.
one of the dumbest conflicts in English colonial period is the fate of Delaware. It is a
Oh boy.
100-year-long feud over who owns the state of Delaware. Is it Pennsylvania or is it Maryland?
Or is it Virginia? Because it's across the river from the Chesapeake.
Well, no. The two main claimants, because it was based on two different and contradictory rulings. The
Yeah,
first
but
was
wasn't
that no, Virginia had no fucking claim on it.
No, I thought that because it's across the Chesapeake that Virginia originally had a claim on it, and then
Virginia
Maryland got
had
formed.
a small claim to it, but it was pretty quickly readdressed. Their border was a lot firmer. The big
I
problem
see.
is there was a big argument over, because the original claim was that Lord Penzance, Pennsylvania, was ascribed a port. It needed a port. It was given to them. It was granted to them by one of the kings. I forget which one. Upon that king's death, and the borders were described to be around Cape Henlopen. The problem is, no one knew which of the two capes were which, because there was Cape Fenwick and Cape Henlopen.
And no one can draw a map to save their fucking life.
Especially since the king made a second rule, another king, the next king after that one, made a ruling over Maryland. Lord Baltimore wanted a confirmation on the Delmarva Peninsula. He wanted a confirmation on the confirmed borders. And he was given a slightly different answer. Slightly different answer. And if the interpretations were, which the lowermost county, which is Sussex, was that part of Maryland or was that part of the Pennsylvanian one? And then there was more arguments over Kent as well. Newcastle County, not so much, because that was, again, Pennsylvania was required, but there was issues with how that fucking border worked anyway. It culminates in the same people that create the Mason-Dixon line, the same two guys, creating the 12-mile arc with that fucking weird round part in the north of Delaware, and decisively putting it on Cape Fenwick, which, by the way, have later collapsed and stopped existing.
Yes. Also,
because that's another thing that happened. They weren't sure because one of the capes actually collapsed and became an island, or became a lagoon, and like partially reconnected.
Yes, it's also important to note something here. When we're talking about the British Loyalists, there's actually a revolt in Boston in 1689, which removed the governor because of the Navigation Acts.
Yep. 15 to 20 miles south of Salem, founded in 1630 by Puritans.
Yes. So when we're talking about the British Loyalists just a bit earlier, this is what they're talking about. It's a political dispute over whether or not the Governor General was in the right.
Another reason why Boston's they have to take the tolerances more. More foreign religious beliefs, like the Quakers and Baptists and even fucking Papists live in the town.
There's even some Catholics, yes.
Yeah, this is also just a thing I feel like it should be mentioned about all these locations. Just as a reminder to anyone who would want to play in this setting, The populations of these towns, and because I'm not calling them cities, these are at most large towns at that moment, and by European standards.
They
These are
don't
like
have populations that large.
Boston,
These are
Boston at this time only recently went over 10,000.
these
It
are
can be
these are still
considered a nice
communities.
sized town,
Yeah,
but not a full city yet. The only
yeah. That's why I
city at
said,
this time would be arguably Philadelphia,
and that's not
yes.
really in the
and
scope of this.
it's still not a full city yet.
Yeah.
I'd also
th-
I also want to mention that basically, if you want to imagine the sort of population density that these places have, look at the rural Midwest now, and you kind of get an idea. Like there's these little towns just dotted all over the place that are miles apart from each other, and they might be within a day's ride of each other, but they're not that far away.
But by that same token, what could happen in two different towns could have very different views of what is about how to deal with certain things, have their own stupid superstitions, and legends, and other things. But just getting into the fact that this is a society much harder and much easier in a way for the supernatural to hide.
So
Harder
let's
because
go into details on that. The
yeah,
smallest of
as
the towns. Oh, sorry.
no, it's like that. Yeah, that's what we're trying to transition into.
Yep. So let's recap on the cities and towns here. Well, towns and villages, I should say. The smallest of them
Boston,
is Salem
Salem
Village
Village,
at
with maybe 200
500,
people tops.
a little under 500, and it is strongly Puritan. There's no one not of that stock or who pretends. There are people that sometimes wander through, but they are hated and suspect of causing devilry.
Yep. There's
Strong
Salem Town.
religious Salem town, still fairly strongly flavored by Puritan beliefs. They still are very skeptical on those who are not Puritans, but they have to deal with travelers and people resting there since it's a major trade route.
There
It's
are
a major
about
trade
2,000
area.
people in there.
A little over 2,000. Ipswich, which I think is in between the two, about 1,000.
15 miles north of Salem.
And it's important.
not it's important because it's on a river.
It's important it's on a river, but it's only a little bit bigger than Salem Village. And the only other thing of note for it is where
it's not even bigger.
is.
It's actually about half as the size of Salem. It's only about
Salem
1,000
town
people.
or village?
Town.
So it's bigger than Salem Village though.
It is bigger than Salem Village, but it's smaller than Salem Town.
So it's small, but it does have the local jail, and it's on a river. And then there's Boston, which is clearly the main administrative area. It actually has, for example,
over 10,000 people.
That's one thing, but it also has access to one of the only native higher education institutions, because Harvard was just opened, and there's also the Boston Latin School.
Yes.
So it is the main place where you'd find your native administrators, your American administrators. This would also be where there's prisons here. There's courts. This is where the King's Court is, where you can actually appeal before a barrister, because that's what they call their judges.
There's also
it's
a
also
lot more industry and trade here.
And because while it has a strong Puritan flavor, therefore they're not actually able to get away with burning and murdering people casually, because guess what? The King's Court's right there. They get fucking caught.
Which is why the one woman ended up in Boston jail for like 30 years.
They can't get away with the shit they want to. And because of that, immigrants find it a lot more tolerable, because
it's also because there's town meetings every week. If you want to go and talk, bring up anything, rather than maybe once a month or once a year for some of these smaller communities or whatever else, you can just go. You can just go to a town meeting and say, I have a problem.
Yeah, it'd be arbitrated.
Yeah, and because I think Madame Isolde is a witch.
They're like, okay, bring them to the court.
And then you have like the Quakers and your other Protestants and even the occasional Catholic going, "You what, mate?"
Why are you talking about
if you're lucky, the person trialed for witch, the jury might include peer. Oh, there's not peers. This is before. Oh wait, this is right after the English Bill of Rights. So you do have a trial before your peers.
You would get your peers.
The real question is, will they remember? Will the judge quote unquote remember to give you those?
It depends on the judge available that day, which is a problem, but still,
yeah,
it's better than Salem.
It's also notable that this is where they talk about the case of Goody Glover. Accused of witchcraft in 1688 by a doctor who was examining Goodwin's daughter for fits. Yeah. It's notable that she could not recite the Lord's Prayer in English. She could recite it in Gaelic, though. And for that, she got declared a witch and killed.
So some other fun facts for Boston. Harvard College, they go into details about where it is and how it is. To give you an idea, the first class of Harvard to graduate was only 9.
Yes. It produces very highly educated people there because, well...
Fun fact, one of the early graduates of Harvard also assisted King Philip himself during his Great War, his Great Death War.
Yes. There's also a small compact that's been formed here. The Descendio de Simius, which are a group of scholars trying to figure out what the hell is happening around the area. And they're basically the runners-up to the Null Mysterious, which is a hunter compact that tries to apply rational study to the supernatural. Think like the Society for Paranormal Paranatural Research or whatever.
They've got some interesting ideas.
Oh yeah, they do. They have.
They even have a curriculum. They even teach it like a college. I love it. It's cute.
Yes, they are cute. A group of teachers. That's the thing.
Really
they
cute.
They are literally a group of Harvard teachers in this era, which because it wasn't a full-time job then. Like you'd be running your own little business probably off to the side, as well as being a professor at the college.
Like I make hats, but I own a hat making store. But
I am a lawyer, but I also educated the college.
Yeah.
I am a bookmaker, but I also educated the college. I am a theologian, but I also educated the college, etc.
I'm a hunter, and I also educated
exactly.
I mean literally, I'm a hunter.
Yeah.
I mean, I catch game.
Yeah,
I mean, I also
no, probably not.
No, he says I also shoot Wendigo.
I also shoot Wendigo. Yeah.
So apothecary, that's they have one.
Yep, they do. They mentioned that like apothecaries are basically just as I mentioned the fact of the
they're
traditional
a witch with better resources essentially.
Yes,
it would have more credibility.
Yes, they are.
Because they usually also are a man rather than an old woman.
Yes. Which is, again, as I mentioned before, this is why you have all these old women around with herb gardens back in the day. It's literally, your small community can't always go to someone distant. They might have to deal with someone that's near you.
But Baddie Dorothy, she knows that if you have the fever, you brew the willow bark and you give a bit of honey to the sore throat, and it should alleviate the worst of it. They might not recover, but they're more likely to if you go to Baddie Dorothy.
And people will remember hits more than misses often.
She managed to save a cow. By tying the legs.
Up.
No, by tying the legs so that it's not splayed anymore, so it could actually develop the legs to walk normally. We would have had to put down the calf otherwise.
Yeah, there's just weird stuff like that because she remembered someone else doing it, and she says, "Go do that."
It's just little grandma who has her herb garden. Maybe sometimes collects honey from bees. Bee hives that she knows that they're nearby. Jars it, preserves it. And then she gets murdered just because she's an old lady with a small garden, maybe a couple of cats,
and who also curses at young women who call her a witch because, well, they're like children, and they throw stuff at her house.
And the fact she has a cat is more because that prevents the rabbits from getting into her. No, the rabbits from getting into her little garden.
Yep,
because rabbits will go after vegetables like that.
But yes, they talk about the apothecary. They also talk about the harbor, which is again a very key.
This is what causes Boston to explode.
Yes. I also want to note they mention Acheron shipping and trading may in fact be in this area. So if you want to run Charon group before Charon group, here you go. You're out of Boston, baby.
So the key players are the High Court Judge, because again, Boston is where you actually go.
Very importantly, he has an academics 3 in law. He's not the most studied, of course, but he's a professional.
And honestly, for the colonies, it's
pretty good.
That's master.
I would say that's a master in law, yeah. The only person that you might get higher is you literally started in England and came over and you've got a 4.
Oh, also, Livingston, here's something that makes him different from the Gowler and the other Salem people who investigate. He'll do
he
the
first
interrogation.
he first asks for a confession of guilt. The prisoner won't confess. He then says,
And
okay,
then will interrogate them, but then what he'll also do is he'll ask and interrogate the witnesses. He doesn't just instantly try to get a torture confession. He asks
Yes.
around before getting into that.
Yeah, then there's a dressmaker, which is, of course, a very common profession.
Common profession, very useful, very lucrative.
And then a postman, which is... I love this man, because he's actually a spy.
Yep, he's a friendly enough sort. Doesn't put stock in superstitions. Salem towns are killing innocent people. He's taking advantage of witchcraft fever, though. He is deeply... Oh. I'm not a fan of them trying to shove that element in.
Well, no, because at this time,
I
we've got to
get
remember,
it,
this is just...
but it's such a minor thing at this time period. That's my issue with it. It'd be like if you had it'd be like if you talked about all fucking Cromwell during the fucking War of the Roses. You get what I mean?
I was gonna say you're talking about German nationalism in the 7 Years' War.
Like, yeah, they're there, but so it's such a minor thing. At least at this time period. It wasn't until Georgie Porgy III where he actually started trying to pay attention to the fucking colonies.
The only thing I will say is that King Philip's War was, in fact, the first kind of time that these kinds of colonial things really had to band together on their own. So there was an idea of at least
There's
New
a
England
grain of it. I just think it's I think they're just grasping a bit too much there.
That's the only thing I'd give them credit for, is at least acknowledging that there was a growing idea of at least
there is a growing idea. I just think they're grasping a bit.
I was going to say, not that they're separate from England, but that they are unique from England. Anyway, let's go into the monsters.
Yeah, like, to give you an idea, Tom, to me, the second half of him, if you told me this was like the 1750s, I'd believe you. This is like 60 years to...
Or even like the 1730s.
I mean, I thought when you said spy, I thought he was a French spy.
There was a genuine opinion in the 1730s that maybe we should try to break off somewhat.
Yeah, this isn't the 1730s.
This is 40
way
years
earlier.
before. That's why I'm having issues with it.
This is 1690s.
This would be like if you called a guy a Protestant rather than just a reformist before the Protestants.
Yeah.
Like it was a setting in the 14
or whatever.
I mean, that'd be fair, a Hussite, but like there's precedent there. It's spurious. I'm having issues with that. Mm-hmm. It's not ruining the book. It's a slight freckle or a slight blemish.
But yeah, going to the supernatural. First, they talk about the supernatural hunters, or the first the hunters, and then moving into the mages.
Yeah, a lot of the conspiracies and compacts you know about, they don't exist yet.
Well, some of them do, but they don't really exist over here.
Or if they do exist, they're in a different form than you're familiar with.
Like, Lucifer are just still around, but they've been mostly based out of Milan.
And Aegis Kaiduru's around, it's just...
They're probably not here. Yeah. There's not a lot of artifacts for them to hunt right now, or that they care about. And
what you'll likely find are the Knights of St. George.
The Malleus Maleficarum, to a degree.
They are
Catholic.
Boston. They are mostly in Boston.
The Ascending ones, which... are rare as well. They're more here. They're probably just traders out for supplies.
The Chiron group, again, much like the Malleus, they're mostly just in Boston, and unlike the Malleus, they're likely in smaller amounts.
Yeah, it's the big compacts are not really involved in these.
You might find some Lucifusion Knights of St. George, though.
Yeah. Which is where the local hunters have to take up the slack in the local compacts.
Yep.
And then it's also important to note in the time of this, they're talking about all this stuff. Sin Eaters are actually rather common, and a lot of European ones that have had any kind of interest are going to the colonies because they're like, wait a second, if there's ghosts here, there's ghosts there.
Yeah, and that's a fair point.
And there's a lot of...
Also, to some degree, people might start figuring out...
War too, recently.
Yeah. Yes. Also, because they're looking at what about because it's like, so what do these guys do with their dead? Because for a sin eater, that's probably a very interesting question of what are their ghosts like? What do they know about ghosts that we might not know?
And in less noble things, sometimes they just want to get away from Europe and all the people who might start kind of figuring out things about about the strange happenings around them.
Yeah. So like, again, if you wanted to play a Sin Eater game set in this era, it would actually be very flavorful and appropriate because Sin Eating was a very, like, I wouldn't call it very common, but it wasn't an unknown practice in colonial America.
And then of course they talk about the vampires, of course, but
you have to.
Well,
they go into it's a dangerous place for everyone, because of that paranoia in this area at the time.
Yeah.
Also problem with low population is less feeding.
So there are some vampires, but they're mostly that are in Boston and Philadelphia.
The ones that aren't,
or they're gangrels out in the wilderness.
Yeah, the ones that aren't are basically preying on trappers and that sort of thing.
You might have some weird like mountain communities. I'd actually say they'd be further south though.
Most likely, a lot of them would probably be looking at plantations as fucking just like
you might have some eccentric plantation owners, or maybe small hill folk areas in Virginia, which are not quite like little villages of like 3 or 4 families where they all kind of go to this one church that has a couple of weird motifs, and you find out there's a small compact of vampires of Langtia Sanctum there.
It's not even getting into the native vampires, because yes, in Chronicles there's no.
You might run into a few of them from the Haudenosaunee.
Clans. There's a few clans that may have existed before the other. Well, that arose inside of the North America.
Like, it wouldn't be surprising.
This is an old world where you can all trace it back to goddamn Israel.
Yeah.
No, there might be a tradition from here. Like, again, the Haudenosaunee were settled enough that you might have vampires there.
Don't forget Cahokia.
Cahokia itself likely
and remember, in Chronicles, there are different forms of vampire that just don't act like what you expect.
And this would be where you can insert your version of night horror vampires here.
Yeah, feel free. Then, on top of all that, you got mages. Mages are actually, of course, the ones that are the most likely to get targeted by a witch trial.
Because the Knights of St. George are looking at these local rubes, right? And they're like, oh, this is
obviously
perfect.
A mage here.
This is
There's obviously a fucking mage.
Not only is there a mage, but it's the perfect veneer. Because we can't be tried for heresy here. We're working with the locals to stamp out a fucking problem.
Yeah.
Also, ostensibly, I guess the idea is a broken clock. Even if they think these people are idiots, enough people are shouting witch that there might fuckers probably some around.
And yeah, the mages are GTFOing. They are escaping to Boston, or they might even just be fucking teleporting away.
Or, maybe playing their talents with people who won't burn them, like, say, people a bit further west.
By the way, the Prometheans, they're loving this frontier.
Yeah.
So much open space, so few people.
There's enough people that they can go to village occasionally and, interact and learn from them, or just try to get that feeling of connection. But there's so much space that I can just hide here and they don't give a shit. Like, who cares if they say these woods are haunted by the devil? They're just not going to enter here.
Yeah, hey, it's a perfect place to set up a wasteland. Yeah, I mean, jokes aside, there are plenty of things like that. Families are just weird-ass loners who just went into the woods and just like, oh yeah, that guy. He trades in furs every once in a while.
Yeah, that guy, he's a little weird. Every now and again, he smells kind of like, there's something a little off with how he smells, like dirt.
Honestly, I think he cleans his. I think he cleans his clothes with piss.
I think he cleans his clothes with dirt. He's also, and then there's the other guy that's nearby. Then there's the other weirdo. That guy always walks around missing a hand.
Well, he's probably a veteran. I'll talk about it.
Yeah, the perfect example of a golem and a siren just being right there.
And then, of course, the werewolves are also fucking loving it here.
Oh yeah, because they have new prey.
New prey, new beasts to fight and prove themselves
and
against,
the wild,
as well as...
Yep, and there's a lot of running space, and they can hunt still.
Also, and just a lot of open land for them to explore.
And hunt from. It's perfect.
Mm-hmm. And now let's move on to the hunters.
Here's the compacts, the Scarlet Watch.
I like all of these, actually. The Scarlet Watch is a society...
Name that they are vampire hunters.
Yes, they are.
They are people who survived the Inquisition, essentially.
Yes, they're aligned from there with the vampires. Supposedly, it's magically signed pact that the 9 families must must have at least one member of the family. Like they're going through like the list of it
because their lives were ruined by vampires. The church almost killed them.
Yeah.
They are out for vengeance specifically.
Yes.
For 50 long years, the family sent their sons and daughters to hunt down the bloodsuckers and murder them by the light of day. As the threat subsisted, members moved on, expanded their estates, forgetting about the blood oath they swore, until today. Now these families find their livelihoods threatened again by the same creature that almost destroyed them in the old world, but now in the new. Unfortunately, the passage of time has wiped away most of the records of how they did this. Worse, these families have drifted apart and don't share any real camaraderie anymore beyond the oath they took a long time ago. What they share is the Vigil. What they share is the Vigil and a
and
promise.
The blood oath.
Yeah.
Yeah, the promise.
It has to be renewed in secret.
So no one knows. No one knows who's the one keeping this stupid pact going.
But it's going, and in any case, the membership in the compact waxes and wanes with each era. So
because sometimes a family's just got a bad birth rate.
Or sometimes a family can literally just get wiped out too.
Yeah, but apparently all 9 are still around by this how it's referenced.
At this period of time, yes.
Yes. It's also noted that during this era, it cooperates with the conspiracies whenever it helps them. They'll turn witches to the Knights.
George, yes.
Yeah, they'll cooperate with the Knights. They'll cooperate with other compacts just as needed. The main thing, though, to note is that the Watch is by far the most paranoid group of any of the compacts around.
Well, in all fairness, they deal with vampires. That's good.
And
good
vampires have long grudges.
Remember, yes.
Vampires are unironically one of the best infiltrators of all the monsters, if only just because of their ability to ghoulify.
Mind fuck you.
If you shoot at one, you best not miss.
Yeah, no, I'm not just saying they're dangerous physically. I meant they're dangerous in a sense because
no, you don't understand. They might not go after you. They might not go after your child, but they'll go after your great grandkid when you're not expecting it and on your deathbed.
Mm-hmm. Also, I was just saying, yeah, they can go after. They can turn people against you.
And their machinations can last for decades.
Generations.
Centuries.
It's also important to note that the Watch is no longer a very noble family group. It's branched out. There's a lot of branch families around now. So they are kind of everyone.
Yeah, which is why they get into the status here. There's your family is kind of one of the hanger-ons, and you've only been recently told. You're not really that aware of the Vigil.
You're one of the most twisted offshoots that you might go into.
Mm-hmm.
No, you can increase it here, but you've only recently found out about anything. And it's important to note that the Watch is voluntary, but you have to be related. So
sometimes you get volunteered.
Yes, sometimes you will get volunteered. Now, it's important to note that with the status from the start, you're going to be able to uncover family lore and all this. So the higher your status,
lore, but you get resources and allies because the families look out for each other.
Yeah,
especially the closer you can tie yourself to the original 9.
Yes. And by the end of it, you may get your new merits may be up to 3 dots as well, and you can. Which this is kind of a useful one of like this is a group of people that kind of like they don't do with a lot of supernatural stuff. They're just allies and people that band together and do stuff. It's a decent.
They aren't your subjects.
They specialize in hunting vampires and basically dealing with them, working together to build the lore on how to end them.
Yeah, which works. Mm-hmm. The stereotypes, of course, are talking about the fact that the Knights of St. George they view as agents of the crown. If they knew, they're not.
Well, they also don't fully trust them because, again, kings, like if they know their lore, kings and royalty have fucked them in the past. They were once noble, but no longer.
Also, they have a dim view of the Aegis because they may not even believe in magic.
It's also that, like, if they're not good for hunting vampires, fuck off.
What's this?
Like,
What's this glowy thing going to? How's this glowy thing allowing me to murder a gangrel?
If so,
It's-
cool. But if it doesn't, fuck off.
yeah. Malleus Maleficarum, they're basically, why didn't you tell us that there was a blood compact? Why the fuck did you just leave us behind? Fucking
And
assholes.
Acheron is very useful, but at the same time,
And they also are envious because remember, they kind of remember the times where they used to be great.
Yeah.
And now we
Old
move
wealth
on
looking
from
at new.
and now
These
we move
guys I
on
really
to,
like the next
Oh,
one.
les voyageurs.
Les Voyageurs. So they're technically werewolf hunters, but they're basically anything you can get around
They're
with this.
Métis werewolf hunters.
Yes.
Awesome. I like this already.
So they're the forest runners, right? Les Voyageurs. So French hunters and their allies like the Algonquin, they hunt monsters and sell the hides.
This
Well, more
actually might be a native compact that the French adopted. They might not have actually.
Yes.
That actually is kind of cool. They might be a native
these are
compact that the
hunters
French
in the most
adopted.
literal sense. These are hunters in the most literal sense.
They will hunt down werewolves. They do not do it for sport. They do it because they believe that werewolves are cursed and feral monsters who cannot be negotiated with or put down.
They can get real good money for the pelts.
Yes. Well, of shapeshifters in general. Like a true werewolf, not so much. A shapeshifter into a wolf, sure. There's that sort of thing too. You gotta remember that. There's werewolves as in the splat werewolf, and then there's people that turn into wolves.
Now, unfortunately, these guys are pretty much extinct by the end, by modern times. But that's more just because
That's
how werewolves
Well, the
adapted
Métis are fucked.
to.
Well, the Métis got kind of fucked.
Well, not only
Yeah.
that, but it's also just urbanization and how werewolves basically work.
Traditions
Yeah.
the traditions probably got passed on to the Bayou people though.
there's probably you could easily bring
You
this
could-
compact back.
Yeah, there's still you can still find them in the bayou in a few bayous in Louisiana, and also
probably
in a
don't know
few
the
other
name
areas in Canada.
You
They
could
probably
they're
don't.
basically like the Bear Lodge, but
Poorer.
They're basically just they do a service, they know their lore, they share it with their lodges, but there's no leader. They're just out to kill.
They're closer to the Union than anything.
it's kind of neat. So basically, to gain status, you have to be ranked according to the number of successful hunts. Even if you don't kill the monster, as long as you are part of the hunt, you get
you didn't
credit
die.
for it. Which means that this is geared towards the groups working together, which is actually
really
kind of a
cool.
neat way
I
of
like
doing it.
that.
Yeah. Also, the important thing is that when you do get a kill, you skin it together in a ceremony. Everyone gets to skin it.
And your pelt number determines your details.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Just rank 1, you're the last to sit at the table
also-
and last be rewarded when your efforts are doled out.
A bit game wise. 1 dot for status to gain a point of resources and a 3 dot mentor is a pretty good deal.
Or a 3-dot mentor.
A 3-dot
which
mentor
would
is
be like-
usually really
mentor.
useful. And 1
A
dot
3-dot mentor would
resources
be
is
like
still
some-
nice.
Yeah, 1 dot of resources for basic gear is actually really good.
It's still nice. Like that's I actually like Les Voyageurs. I could totally see keeping them as a compact if you did a hunter bayou setting. Like at Baton Rouge at night.
Yeah. Or just a rural area in general. This could just be the local hunting club.
Second degree is you're a veteran.
Gain
You are a
dots
veteran.
and weapons, extra
He
contacts, or
survived
2 dots in the
or
fame.
personally killed several hunters. Oh, several monsters.
Several,
I mean,
yeah.
you're not a
And then the
slasher
last
yet.
one is actually really good. You gain 3
You
dots and
are-
resources
you are-
traps.
You are a legend amongst hunters.
Yeah, because you
So
should be dead by now.
You have
you've
4
probably,
new
you've
hunters
probably
you train.
killed an actual. You've probably done a hunt by yourself. and
Yes.
lived.
You also are assigned new hunters to train, which is actually a really good way to handle
You are
a
the
3-dot.
3-dot mentor.
Yes. That's actually a really good way to do it. So 4 allies, 3 dots of the fame merit, or 3 resources and traps.
I'm
which
not
is,
gonna lie.
No, it's no. How it's
Doubting
written,
Souls
it's 3
is
dots.
easily my favorite right now already.
It's very good. They even talk about the fact that they're talking about the fact that hunting vampires doesn't seem like a big challenge.
Also, they
Also,
have
I have
little,
no time
they have
for
little
stuck
respect.
up pompous blowhards who think they're better
Yeah.
than I am. What are they doing to protect me? Nothing. They form this shadow coat to rule out other hunters, put my friends at risk. There are real monsters out there with claws. Maybe they should try hunting them for a change.
Then they talk about like their relations to the natives, which is that the keepers of the weave, they're hunters that tell stories about monsters and members of their tribe. by indicating what they where the monsters are and what they feed on and where they are, they arm the members of their tribe. I hope they will work with me one day to fill me in on stories I don't know.
I love this compact.
It's a very good compact.
Even if I don't know, this or Demon Constantinople, this is a hard fight.
They're both very good settings.
Also, they don't really know what to think of the Malus because they just see them as like weird papists.
Well, no. Remember, a lot of these people are Catholic.
I know, but even more papist, like in the sense that like what I mean by is they're extremely loyal to the church.
Yeah, in their own words, do these hunters put the vigil first or their faith?
Yeah, because remember, these are French Catholics. French Catholics are a different breed.
Yeah, Irish Catholics are as well.
Another the actual native compact.
There's actually two of them.
Well, technically, the Voyageurs could also be.
There's another one after this. There's another
one after them. I actually want to say that there is a new compact that is similar to this one in second edition, which is Sworn. But I think that this one's slightly better.
They remind me of West African griots, where they just memorize the lesson.
Yes, this one I think is basically like this is the attempt to bring this into second edition as like they're trying to resurrect this tradition. If you do that with second edition, these are really good as a way of like an alternate way to run Sworn, which is the Native American hunter group in second edition as a compact.
The stories may be told, sung, and danced, or woven. Yep. Oh, that actually is clever because they can hide their they're not crazy, but they can hide people thinking they're crazy by just showing all these tapestries. When in reality, they just tell them how to murder monsters, or that this monster's real.
Traditionally, they have a lateral structure and individual cells that operate according to the traditions of their specific tribe. Its members' goal, however, is to support other hunters as opposed to competing with them. So basically, their basic philosophy is that we just share the knowledge. It doesn't matter whether or not
we are the keepers of the traditions that have kept us safe.
Yeah. So
we're
the
one that tells you to avoid those. We're the one that tell you to avoid.
Like, it doesn't matter if you're a blood enemy to our tribe. You're not going in there. We're telling you not to do that.
We are the ones that tell you the people of cold skin
live there. Yeah, don't do that.
Yeah, because it doesn't help. It doesn't help them if those colonists get.
You got to tell the white people. The fishmen come from those shores over there by Innsmouth. Don't fuck with them.
Or do fuck around.
Or do, but anyway, you got to have a lot of guns. Call your big king army. Your big king army.
Anyway, but their status gives them, like I said, a mentor or the language dot and a 2-dot mentor.
Yes, that's the other thing, is that the keepers of the weave are also kind of starting to die out because it's the Pequot tribe got wiped out kind of in the war.
Not only that, but the massive disease flood.
Yeah, there's not a lot of.
There's still the traditions.
Oh, and the Wampanoags are all fucking dead. There's
still some traditions, and it's from what I can tell, the Voyagers might be trying to adopt them, so that they stay around to a degree.
Yeah, it's also that there's now a lot more monsters coming in, and they don't know how to say their names properly yet, so that's getting weird too. Because there's the vampires are coming over.
And
there's
they
other
have
ghosties
vampires,
from Europe,
but these are different ones.
Yes, exactly.
And then there's these weirdos, these weird. They call them fairy. What?
That's just the weird people that live in the woods occasionally and take children, right?
They have their own version of those spirits.
Exactly. That's the other thing is with Changeling, if you wanted to run a Changeling game in this time period, it'd be really neat to do it as a group of natives that were abducted by more European fays that's encroached.
Or alternatively, you try to
other way
take
around
their mythology. Yeah.
That could be really cool.
Yeah. Third dot is you're an accomplished storyteller. When you visit the tribe, you can share their knowledge. You gain 2 dots of cult, 2 dots of expression, or 2 dots of politics. Remember, what is a comma does not mean it's another or. You get both those.
Yeah. Yep. So that's actually pretty solid.
And then finally, the final one, you are the wise old woman at this point.
3 dots, socialize or
cult, or 4 allies or contacts. So you either have a lot of people you know, or you're very convincing, or you just know a lot more for free.
And of course, why would they have any friendly
relationship
with
anyone else? They do find the fact that the Scarlet Watch is interesting because they don't know what a vampire is to these people, so like we want to learn about that. But I don't think we're going to be very welcome in Boston.
They like the Protectors of Light, who
Well,
are,
yes.
in all fairness, another native group.
And then the less Voyagers are like, why are these idiots doing this?
Yeah, why are you running out into the woods, dummy?
Why are you doing this?
It's always the young men that die first.
But yes, then the last one is the Protectors of the Light.
Which are the...
These guys used to be the Wampanoag.
Yeah, because basically
they're remember, at this point, the Wampanoag are all fucking dead.
Yeah.
The somewhat matriarchal societies, because it's important to note that a lot of authority for some of these Western tribes it wasn't actually passed from father to son. It was passed matrilineally. So women were actually very important in terms of like this is how you determine who is in charge. So like it would go from like uncle to nephew, basically.
Yeah, as I reiterate, the Wampanoag are effectively a dead nation
at this point. Yes. So
King Philip's work destroyed them.
The tribes then start to move around and join each other too. So like this is sort of the survivors of these areas and also the more active hunters of the area. For example, Pukwudgies, the Toad Woman, all these sort of boogeymen, and now there's these fuckers that come from Europe that are also happening.
I'm just gonna reiterate for this thing. In King Philip's War, they lost 40% of their population in death, and then a good majority of their population was enslaved and sent to the Caribbean. What's left is not anything to talk about.
Yeah. There's not a lot of survivors here. These are probably the ones that are left.
I'm looking into it, and I honestly don't think they're basically dead by the end of this century.
Yeah. These guys would be wiped out. Like the less Voyagers are the closest to them. These guys are basically gone.
Yeah, this is why you don't see them in the modern Knights.
Basically,
they're tied to one specific tribe, and when that tribe got wrecked.
Yeah. It's important to note, though, that when you're looking at their compact, it's a very good way to run any other kind of group like this. There's the first dot is you just gain a dot in either occult, survival, or orphanry.
Yeah, here's another thing about Protectors of the Light. They don't celebrate because there's literally nothing left to fucking celebrate. They're dying!
Yeah, that's kind of fun.
So they don't do any celebrations. They just focus on murdering as many monsters as possible.
3 dots is you've actually successfully killed something.
Well, not only that, but you're getting older.
Yeah, you may now recommend a new recruit. You gain more supplies, so you can gain either contacts or resources and weapons and survival gear. And the last one is you've got 5 dots. You may be a trader.
You're not just a good hunter; you're an honorable hunter.
Yes, you might have 3 dots in resources for trading tradable goods, 2 allies win contact, or 3 dots in the safe place merit.
And by their stereotypes, they for good reason do not like the colonists.
They don't like about anyone.
They're fine. They fine with the Weavers.
They're okay with the Voyagers. They're not.
As they say, I fear we are running out of time.
Yeah.
Well, with the Keepers of the Weave, they're not going far enough.
Yeah, they're not militant enough for their liking.
And
the Voyagers,
they see them as idiots.
They're idiots.
Yeah, they're useful idiots, but idiots.
They're useful idiots, though. If they're hunting a werewolf, I'll ask them for help if they're still alive. They're probably all dead because werewolves are murder machines.
Malus Torum, avoid them.
Avoid them.
They courage. What the fuck? What the fuck are they?
I don't know. Are they? They're evil. I think I'm just gonna kill them.
They literally admit that they're descended from evil. Must murder.
Yep. Must murder.
And they don't have one for the Knights of St. George. I can imagine it's
kill them all.
Kill them all. No, it's their heads will be hung from the trees.
Yeah.
So here's some tactics they got.
Cross-examine.
Yeah.
It's a variant of the interrogation tactic found in Witchfinders. It's basically used to try to find out if someone's a witch.
Or just it's a thing where it's a
interrogation. Yeah.
And you need all of these, by the way.
Yeah. Requirements. You need an actor as a priest or a magistrate or another profession with interviewing people. And you just need to get together. So you need 3 more people to do it. Like all this, the tactics are one of the ways that hunters are able to negate advantages of monsters.
By the way,
Mhm.
this was invented by the Malleus
Yes.
Maleficarium.
The flintlock reload, an instant action actually. Interesting.
Flintlock muskets are basically this is attack.
It
The
requires
primary
2
actor is
people
the
though.
shooter, while the secondary actors handle reloading and sighting. So basically, an expert marksman can reload on his own in about 15 seconds, but that can cut into accuracy. So basically, you've got someone else with you that's
You
reloading
have a
it.
second. You have a second.
Yes. Ubuntu handed me my Shoggoth rifle. You know.
Ubuntu over. I would love to see. I would love to see a Great White Hunter like an Alan Quartermain novel where he murders eldritch abominations.
It would be great, yeah. Uh, they've also mentioned that there's beneath Salem's town church lie 3 glass coffins containing the perfectly preserved corpses of 2
They've all been
16-year-old boys.
shaved, their eyes sewn shut, and their mouths stuffed with asphodine.
Asphodel.
Asphodel.
All 3 are clothed in linen and leather sandals. Each wears a gold pendant around their neck and has a unique name engraved
No one
upon a
knows
flat
they're
desk.
there.
Unchosen, unbidden, unloved. No
Are
human
these
alive or
fucking
dead.
mummies?
They might be. They might
It
be
might
something
be, or
creepier.
maybe, or in Elfast they say alive or no human knows they're buried. Which
No one
actually,
knows what the fuck that could be.
for the record, for how it goes alive or dead, I think that means also the vampires, like because vampires were still once humans, and that
These
they're
could
just
be
old
god
humans.
machine things. This could be a supernatural thing that's weird and not well categorized. This could be whatever the fuck you want it to be. This is a plot thread
That's-
thing that they just threw in there.
Wait,
Yeah.
wait. I think I know what it's based on. Salem's Lot.
Yeah, that's probably it.
But
Stephen King
yeah,
nod.
but yeah,
Yeah.
this thing is obviously the Flintlock Reload is a bit kind of wonky in the sense that it kind of requires you all to be stationed in one place and not move. But but that's kind of the point. It was made for like ambushes where you've got all the time where you prepped this already.
Yeah, it gives you
Yeah.
extra. It gives you extra attacks effectively.
Yeah, which is useful.
Yeah, this is for when you know something's gonna be popping through a door to murder you, and so you have four hunters, 2 with guns and 2 reloading, just blasting it like with 4 shots within like 5 seconds.
Fuck. Yeah. They also talk about the fact that before you identify what monsters you're going to use, identify what kind of game you're going to be running and who you're playing with. If you want to accuse monster got caught up in the trials, shapeshifter. If you want a more physical game, something out in the wild. Political, Witcher, Changeling.
Bloodsuckers.
Bloodsuckers, Ghosts, and Witches. You know, like use the stuff around this time. Also note that misidentification is very common in this period. Feel free to mislead your players a little bit.
Yeah, because hunters aren't dumb, but
They just don't have the same
misinformed.
information. There's no internet. They can't Google Algonquin thing that eats people and find out, oh, that's a Wendigo. You know?
Or you know, it could be a case of it looks like a vampire, smells like a vampire, or acts like a vampire.
Why
but
isn't
no,
it?
this
Why
is not a vampire.
Why is
Why
it
is it
still
not
going
repulsed by
after I
garlic?
staked it?
Why is it not repulsed by garlic?
I
What's going
staked
on
it
here?
in the heart. Why is it still moving?
Wait a minute. What's a shape changer?
Why is this thing transforming into a bird? I thought these were supposed to transform into owls, not geese. What the fuck?
I thought. I thought this was one of the weird beast. Wait. Oh no. We were hunting shape changers, but wait. Why is this thing only appearing at night? Why is this thing drinking blood instead of devouring flesh?
Yeah.
Oh, we got a gangrel.
Yeah, exactly. Now, the list here are a couple of monster antagonists: a half werewolf, half human person that's from France, running out and around. You know, can speak wolf.
He has no clue what he is because he was never picked up by a tribe.
Not necessarily. He's got dread attack, claws, and teeth. 2, which basically means too lethal. The primal dirt, so a little bit better, and totemic form, which means that he can shape change. The old man by the bay is a monster from Algonquin Myth. He's kind of a Wendigo. Maybe. He eats people.
Also, as a reminder, he's not a good person. Is this thing like you can't do the Jekyll and Hyde thing because he's fully aware of what he's doing.
Yeah, but Doe's
Every
an
human he
asshole,
kills,
yeah.
he chose to kill.
Yeah, he's a piece of shit.
Yeah. The old man by the bay. What the fuck kind of thing? You know, he just has to eat people. Possibly a serial killer. Use him as that. Use him as a good way to as a misdirection. Yeah. His curse is to stay alive. He must feed on human flesh once a fortnight. He has to eat it once every 2 weeks.
Oh yeah, he could be like one of the related to, but not exactly a kindred, like a night horror vampire.
Yeah, you could easily run as that.
Or maybe he's like a ghoul that he's some sort of
A
fucked
weird
up ghoul.
ghoul thing, yeah. You could also, the next one is Frau Elsa, who is a demon. Her torture is by the devil. It punished her to have to conscript 666 living souls into
That
his
face.
service.
Oh wait,
Yeah.
I'm kind of aware. There's a myth similar to that. I remember this one.
Yes.
Where like this is actually something similar, where a farmer, where the farmer's wife was clearly a demon because the farmsteads around them started to fail, and I think it resulted in her being buried alive.
Yeah, you could. That could be what this is based on.
But yeah, and this is a case of a very much an antagonistic demon, because sometimes you gotta remind yourself that the characters that you can play are just as likely to be, actual inhuman monsters, morally wise. Because
The
says
story
with her.
hub section is okay. Like, here we go.
Well, there's
There's
also
the
the
idea-
matter that like this could be a case of destroy the God Machine before it can plant itself in here.
Yeah. But up to the next section, which is Hunter Civil War, which is
Fair enough. The Shadow Court sets the whole thing up as essentially it's an
It's like-
inquisition on the Inquisition.
maybe St. George's go nuts. There's a bunch of ways to escalate the tiers,
there's the
basically,
tiers.
of like, is it local? Is it about maybe larger? Or is this the entire colonies as everything's going nuts? Truth on Trial, which is, congratulations, you're part of the civil court system. It is time for
A trial.
the witch trials. Are you ready to have to deal with a bunch of screaming teenage girls who may accuse you of also being witches when you go, this doesn't make any sense?
Or worst case scenario, or even as a even greater great, and I'm saying that in quotations. You have to, as it says in the thing, maybe you witnessed, maybe they actually did see something,
But they're worse
they
than they could have
misinterpreted it
fucking
completely wrong.
imagined.
No, they misinterpreted it.
Yeah.
Or alternatively, they're right, but horribly right. And now that this person has been dragged to court, yeah,
You realize, oh fuck, this is a werewolf. Oh no.
and they're just playing the game. They're literally just playing with the court because they, like, as soon as you identify this person, this son of a bitch can just rip into their war form and murder everyone.
Yeah. So the question is, how do you get them off and let them keep, because you can't.
How do you either
You can't
acquit them?
openly
No.
Yeah.
How do you either acquit them or make damn sure when they execute them that doesn't happen? Because this one might just be playing with their prey.
Yeah.
Because can't you see a werewolf like willingly go at the trial, like pretend and then right when they're gathered by the cruel townsfolk, turn into a monster and try to get high score?
Or if they want to do the real high score, do it while they're in the courtroom.
Yeah, can't you see a werewolf plotting like an ambush,
Yeah.
like of a massive amount of prey, like
Especially
that?
if it's a native. Especially about this, it's a native. It's a native.
Or it's a werewolf that knows that someone there is a spirit host, so they intentionally let themselves get caught to hunt the spirit host in the jail. So they're waiting for the trial.
It doesn't matter if he massacres everyone else.
Yeah, it doesn't matter if
damage.
there's a massacre. Yeah, collateral damage. Fuck it, spirit has to die.
Also,
Hunt must
Wolf will
happen.
hunt, and those guys definitely are trying to hunt him.
Yeah, fuck it, go for it.
As I mentioned before, screaming teenage girls, the vast majority of accusers and victims of witchcraft are children under 13. What creature or demonic servant could be afflicting the young?
Oh god,
it's called puberty.
Well, no. You could also have like, imagine a demon trying to like corrupt a god machine, the god machine nucleus of Boston, by using the youth as their minions, or alternatively having them killed so they can harvest the materials to corrupt the god machine infrastructure.
Yeah, you can do so many different things here. So it's a very flexible subplot, and it really depends on what you're doing with the children. Is it a huge, large thing? Is it a small thing of like there's a couple of kids in a village or whatever?
And I like that they have the tier lists for this.
I think the tier list is one of the best things about this sort of section. I think that this should have been in other sections as well.
It relies heavily on you, the ST, thinking through all the ideas. but I
tier
love
2 where yeah.
that they give the tears. And sorry, Greg, you can go now.
I like tier 2 of Suffering Innocence. How one of the Lucifers is like, we need to murder this child.
That's actually kind of fucking great.
They're a spawn of the devil, but not like us, the bad kind.
That you could definitely do that. Another one I like is of course, the period area films with like the Crucible,
which is
both
actually
editions of it.
to reference. More Weight comes from the Crucible, and it's actually
Yes.
based on an old man. That this guy actually really did exist.
Yes, he
Giles
was.
Corey, I think.
Giles Corey.
Giles Corey.
He was accused of being a witch, and they were trying to get him to confess to witchcraft. His wife was already, I think, basically going to be executed. So he's like, "Fuck it, I'm not giving you shit."
Because the thing is, he cottoned on because this is the thing with some of the witch trials. It was an attempt to get land that otherwise would have been kept among the family.
As I mentioned
because
at the beginning
as
of this,
witches
Dear Watchers,
would allow it to be confiscated. Yeah.
As I mentioned at the beginning of this, Dear Watchers, in times of religious strife there will always be grifters.
It also didn't help that his heir was his granddaughter, I think. Like it was a female inheritance. So rather than have these assholes confiscate his property, rather than confess, and they tortured him by basically trying to press him to death. His response every time they demanded he admit or recant, more weight.
Yeah,
because he knew because he cottoned on to what the whole thing was.
By church law, obviously, if he died, like he obviously was a true believer. If he was, he would have confessed.
Yeah.
So it basically he realized
beat
that he
them
has
at
to
their
die.
Own fucking game.
Yeah, he did. He beat them completely at their own game.
He is irrefutably innocent because how else? Like no, because obviously this man was an extremely good Christian.
Mm-hmm.
Best settings are those like this with lots of plot hooks. Yeah, they're just little nucleates.
Yes and no.
I'd say yes and no. I like that more. This gives you details on the setting if you're not familiar.
It gives you enough to work with, and then it gives you a bunch of really good sources at the end, which is always a good thing to have.
Yeah, I would also say as a inspiration that would be very much appropriate if you wanted to run a hunter game, especially to focus on the more supernatural and especially the wild part. They just don't have it here probably because this came up before it. Watch The Witch.
The Season of the Witch is the one with Nicolas Cage.
No, 2015. No, the 2015 movie.
Which?
No, because they mentioned the Season of the Witch. Hold on, this is the one with Nicolas Cage. I swear to God.
No.
Yes, it is. I was right.
No, he's right. There's two different movies. It's The Witch and Season of the Witch.
Season of the Witch is set in the
Crusades.
That one. No, that's in the inspiration section here.
Yeah, I'm talking about it as an inspiration if you want a very good inspiration for the level of kind of paranoia and what these people thought of. The Witch 2015 is quite literally about a family sent from one of these extremely Puritan communities into the woods because the dad essentially was pissing feuded with the leadership of the town.
Yes,
and all the wonderful things that lived out there, at least in the minds of
yeah. Now the fun bit here is that they do mention the two books by Cotton Mather, which is The Discourse in Witchcraft and The Wonders of the Invisible World. These are first-hand accounts of what happened at Salem from the mind of someone who was involved in the prosecution. It's very interesting to read. It's worth looking at because there's a lot of other weird colonial ghost stories and happenings and things like that are also involved.
And of course, there are the if you want to get more into the native stuff, they've got some stuff down there, and it's not just Last of the Mohicans; it's some other stuff.
Yeah, there's of course the ones that are really good here is they talk about like autobiographies from the tribe itself. There's a group of other articles to understand stuff if you want to play a slave or a free black man in the era.
Because there were at this time, Massachusetts did have not a big one, but they did have a small slave population.
They also had a small free black population. The United States at this time did in fact.
I'm gonna dock points for them putting a goddamn URL in this book.
I will dock them that, but
yeah, that's I mean, does it actually?
www.
No, the PDF actually has like an auto clicky thing.
Oh, that's neat.
That's neat.
Yeah,
I still agree.
Also dock points, but at the same time.
Oh, there's
Like,
another
'cause-
one. There's a couple actually.
There's three total.
Yeah, that's a doc.
yeah,
That's
because
a
I'm
blemish.
saying that because I clicked on the one for Indian Country Today, and it led me to.
Okay, so that's another blemish. Anyway.
Nativelanguages.org is still around though. I think I've used this before myself.
Anyway, it's about 3 hours, and we just finished.
We are at about 3 hours, and we just finished it.
Let's just end this by showing the picture of the last page.
I did.
The next one is another changeling setting, by the way. But I think that what's your opinion on this overall, Adam?
A grim dark era. We won't read that yet, but that gives you an idea. So, all right, my opinion on Doubting Souls. To me, I don't think it quite. I almost want to be not generous because it's high good at minimum. High good at minimum because it gives. I've always been a fan of whenever they introduce hunter compacts, I find them interesting. They did that in Requiem for Regina as well with the vampire groups.
Yeah.
And I always like that they give you little toolkits that you can then use later on. I also really like that for their story hooks, while they're minimalist and there's not a lot you can work with, which you can take either way. If you like to just use them as a prompt, like if you're an ST that usually works from a prompt, it's really powerful. That's usually how I do stuff. But if you like more structured play, that's an issue. But I like how you can adjust the level of how crazy things get, depending on how strong your group is or depending on what type of game they're into.
And also into like what kind of game you want to run. Do you want to run a massive thing that stretches the whole European colonies of America at this time, or do you want to focus specifically here?
And in all fairness, they didn't really flesh out the southern part.
They didn't flesh that part. It's clearly around the Massachusetts Bay.
But they're giving you ideas if you want to drive.
Yeah, and maybe the Great Lakes with Les Voyeurs.
This is clearly for the 13 colonies regions as well as French Canada. Primarily, though, it's a New England-based thing. And as it is, I'd say high, good, just breaking into amazing.
I'd actually put this at amazing.
I'd just say this is a good book, and it's a good book that I'd recommend.
I do recommend.
Some things I'll say are good.
I would recommend getting this. I always link every time we do one of these streams. I've always linked to the book that we cover. I cannot say more than enough. I would recommend getting this booklet.
I would recommend, as I've said before, buy the whole Dark Eras book. There's a lot
that
to
also
work with
works,
here.
Because I've never said anything is worse than decent.
There's nothing in here that I would genuinely call bad.
There's only two negatives, and they're minor blemishes. They slightly overemphasize the rising independence movement, because yes, there's a seed of it here. It's fair to at least bring up slightly, but with a couple of the characters, they focus just a bit too much on that.
I think it's fair to mention
it's a slight overreach. It's not a big deal.
Yeah, because I want to note that the Massachusetts uprising of 1689 is a pretty it's pretty obscure if you don't live in that region.
It's massively obscure, and that's why I'm slightly dinging it, because this is for everyone, not just the 2 million people that live in that area.
Yeah, this isn't just for the autists.
So I think it's slightly overreaching, and Greg, you make a good point. The 3 websites was kind of stupid.
I'm not dogging, mate. Just saying it's just
I'm not dogging. Guys, these are just blemishes that I've noticed.
Be better.
They could do it better, yeah. But honestly,
I like that they do describe the town a bit. I feel like what would be great for these Chronicles of Darkness, even though it would bloat the book considerably, I would love to have seen a town map a town map or two.
Yeah, that's really the downside of this, is that they don't have the space to do it. If we ever get to Requiem for Rome, they do a full map of the city, which is really cool.
That does not get into. It's right on the between. I'd say at amazing, but that's just because I tend to be favorable towards things like this. And I did say this is probably my second. I'd argue it's probably my second, because while Edo period Hunter is interesting,
I think you rated Three Kingdoms of Darkness is amazing, but that was mostly because it's just.
Well, I have a soft spot for China.
Yeah.
I have a very strong soft spot for Chinese history. So I'd say this is within. I keep changing my opinions, but this is easily a top tier sell. This is a top tier book.
Honestly, this and Fallen Blossoms are very, very good hunter settings. They're around the same time as well, because the Tokugawa shogunate lasts into this era. So you could theoretically run a crossover game with these two.
I'd say that this is I'm gonna go with amazing, and here's why. Not only does it cover a really good time period, it did what Viking Werewolf tried and failed to do. It's specifically around a period of time, a relatively short period of time, because while the witch trials happened throughout the 17th to early 19th century, the Salem
it's focusing
ones
on a
are
specific
notorious.
location. Yeah, a famous specific location at a specific time, with a lot of other things happening
that
around the
strongly
area.
impacts not just this region, but the area around it, like the entire
Yeah.
colonies. It is not like Viking era werewolf. Yeah, Brian Boru dying horribly in the death of Viking Ireland. That's interesting.
It's important. It's historically important. It's interesting, but it's not very well fleshed out.
It's not very well fleshed out, and it's overshadowed
also, it's
by
the end of
literally
an
any
era.
other fucking story.
Also, it's the end of an era when most people's interest and most how media has actually kind of pushed toward it, and it's doing something that media doesn't. But at the same time, it's what
The
most people are
climax
interested
of the
is the rise and height of this era. That's
this
what most
is the
people are interested in.
climax
Demon
of witch
tried
hysteria
that.
in the U.S.
Demon tried that with Constantinople, but
and
it
worked
also
well
because it's the
it
death and beginning.
Yes, it's that chaotic period as things transition, and how do you situate yourself in there as a demon?
Exactly. Another thing, and Requiem for Regina, it's also the end of a period.
Yeah,
but
it's
that one's
right at the tail
interesting
end.
because it is the end of a long-reigning, fairly good queen whose actions are starting to get more muddy and erratic and fearful.
Yeah,
which is good for vampire. It's very good for vampire because
it's a very appropriate.
that.
Yeah, it's a very appropriate era for vampire.
Vampires love decay. That's why Requiem of Rome works.
And also why Requiem for Regina works as well.
And that's why Baltimore by Night would be an amazing setting book.
No, I'd say Detroit by Night.
No, there's not enough people there, dude. Detroit's collapsed.
I mean, they have a setting. They have a setting book for Gary, Indiana, man. Like for Old World.
Sao Paulo
I'm dead
by
serious. San Paulo by Night would be really good.
Come on, it's the Sabbat. It's literally the second most important city to the Sabbat, to the point where it actually sometimes exceeds Mexico City in importance among its bishops.
I mean, Mexico City by Night was also a pretty fun book, but like, it's still.
But yeah, all in all, I think I was just trying to be a little more stringent because I tend to overvalue, and then you guys try to drag me down from there. Not an accusation.
Drag you down.
Well, no, you try to explain to me why my rating is a little too high for what something
I
is.
didn't.
No,
I didn't.
Usually it's the reverse.
I didn't say anything.
I try to convince you up usually.
Oh, really?
Adam, I didn't say anything.
No,
but yeah, no, like for me, this is amazing because this is a very, very, very good example of what you can do very well with a historical setting and a historical event, and turn it into a game setting. It's a great blueprint for it.
Yeah, I'd say it's solidly amazing.
I just said it was good, and the only criticism is that no, this doesn't really fit the southern half of the colonies.
That's true.
That is a minor critique.
That is a minor critique, but the southern part of the colonies didn't have the same witch hysteria that the northern ones did.
I know. Just that was just like, but there's just more going on the fact that I wasn't critiquing your take, Adam.
Well, no, I didn't assume you were. It's just in prior reviews, I've actually been quite generous with things I've noted, and then sometimes I'm driven by arguments by either you or Tech on what I miss, or traditionally what I miss or what I overemphasize or underemphasize. Oh no, not just last, like in general. Like it's just how I am as a reviewer. I tend to be very in the moment, and I can be usually argued up or down depending on the.
I mean, personally, I'd rate this below the Japanese one, but it's still good.
The Japanese one had a lot of nice thought into it.
Also, I think I like that a bit more because it fleshed out what the supernatural aspect and not just the hunter aspect.
True. This is a hard
because
one.
it doesn't really get it, because this book doesn't actually get into this part of the, like, it's not a doc, it's more of a praising of the other. This book doesn't really get into the supernatural because it has just,
Because
you're supposed to
the
transplant
element
a lot of
is
the
the paranoia, the human element.
Yeah, it's the human factor, the fact that a lot of these witch trials were literally, there is the old woman down the street, she is a witch, we are going to beat her, strangle her, hang her,
and for anything
whatever.
that is supernatural, you're supposed to transplant it from the other books.
And I think maybe that's why I like this so much. Because, okay, viewers and later viewers, one of my favorite movies of all time is John Carpenter's The Thing. It's easily in my top favorites. I think only Alien beats it. And guess what? Both of them deal with paranoia. You never
my favorite.
Yeah, you never quite know who's behind who's behind that face. Is it your actual working buddy, or is it an otherworldly abomination that duplicated him? I mean, Body Snatchers. That's another fun one.
Yeah, I was going to say Invasion of the Body Snatchers is one of my favorite movies, but like when it comes to horror, I still think Alien's a better horror movie overall. And I'd actually call Predator a horror movie somewhat.
It starts as an action, but yeah, it ends as it ends as an action. It starts as an action, but the middle is a horror movie.
Yeah, which is why it works. You could actually do a Predator game in this setting and era. I mean, like a similar style of thing, like
you could totally get away with it.
Yeah, you could literally take the plot from Predator of you are a bunch of troopers in the King Pickett's Rebellion, and you come across a native village that's been absolutely fucking slaughtered, and it isn't by any colonists, and now you're being hunted, and there's like one person
Is
to
it
survivor.
A skin changer? You don't know.
Yeah, you could do something like that, and it would fit, and you'd probably have a player at the end of it go like, "Son of a bitch, we just played Predator." You could do something like that. And that's the point, right? You can do a lot of things like that with a good hunter game. Is look at movies like horror movies and all this and use it. And that's one of the good things about World of Darkness in general. I like is that you can do that. And this is way a ramble. Anyway,
no, it's fine. This is Lore Ramblings. And hey, it's been a while since we've done it. You know that we enjoyed this because we spent 3 hours on this bad boy.
Yes, we did. This is one of our longest streams we've ever done. It's much like the Chinese one where we got distracted about the actual history of the time period. Yeah, because
this is a good time period. This is one of the best decisions that Onyx Path made when they did this.
Yeah,
it's probably one of the more asked for settings too, actually.
Oh, definitely. Like one of the things that sold Dark Eras to me was this.
Yeah, and as soon as I knew they did Doubting Souls, this is why I wanted to do a full run through.
Yeah, I think that overall, as we go through this book and as we're coming into the tail end, as we're getting into more modern settings, because we're going to jump actually over 100 years.
Grimm's Fairy Tales, yeah.
To the era of Grimm's Fairy Tales for the next one, and then it's just going to kind of keep getting close until 1970s New York as the latest setting. But I think that one of the advantages of a book layout like this is that it gives you other ideas for things you can port forward in time.
Because the Voyageurs, you can keep using them until, I'd say, the 1900s, where hunting kind of massively declines.
Where the hunting culture of the United States changes, basically, from survival hunting more towards sport hunting.
Which would probably kill off... that probably is what killed off the compact initially.
Yeah.
Or you could have it survive in, say, parts of Louisiana.
Alaska.
Or Alaska, yeah.
Well, necessarily, it's in all fairness, like if you did it like that, that's just be like just taking the name and the stuff, but the actual
putting in a different region.
Traditions, but the actual traditions more accurately priced to probably the Bayou folk of Louisiana at this point.
Yeah,
that's the only people that can really claim like an ancestry to it.
Yeah, I mean, it's more about like how you use the crunch that's given to you.
You know the robotic age stuff that we're gonna finish up eventually.
Yeah,
they have Preston Poland did another book called Horrors, which I think you might really enjoy, even if you don't particularly like because it is you set up a stock horror movie. In a way, you play the horror movie characters, and there's an entire section on designing the monster and the rules by movie logic it relies on.
That's actually really neat. That's a lot like slashers.
Movie logic that the players run by.
So that's actually something that is in the pipeline. We just have to finish Robotic Age first, which that
Yeah.
might be what we do next week. We might try to finish it off.
I haven't actually watched the Robotic Age videos fully yet.
Are you a big fan of iRobot, Mega Man X, or just stuff like Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep?
I actually read the whole like story collection for iRobot that Asimov wrote himself, like that, and I really enjoyed it.
The setting is effectively, it's not a dystopia. Well, actually, before we get into that, have a good night, viewers. If you want to join our Discord, it is in the description link. It will last a week. That's how we usually do this thing. And next week, I think we will finish Robotic Age. We don't want to make this a 3.5 hours. We could get into the weeds here. So see ya.
Yeah, we'll talk about Robotic Age then. Have a good